But thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. We're so thrilled to have you at the bank. If it's your first time joining us at the Federal Reserve Bank, we're also really grateful for you for bearing with us through security. So I'm Sloan. If we haven't met before, I work on our engagement team here at the Philadelphia Fed, and I'm in our Community Development and Regional Outreach Department. And it is really, really a pleasure to be here with you and to be here with the Early Learning Investment Commission and Andrea and her team. We're so thrilled to have this conversation and be in person together. It's so refreshing after a few years of being virtual. If you haven't been to a Fed event before, this will be your first time experiencing the disclaimer, but I will just go ahead and do that now. So the information, analyses, and conclusions set forth are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia or the Federal Reserve System. And before we go ahead and get started, I'm just going to go ahead and run through a few logistics. You've already done the hardest part, which is always just getting in. But I do want to also let you know that we are recording today's event, and by being present here with us, you're consenting to us recording, the presentations and the Q&A portion that will follow. And so we are going to be doing some social media promotion for this event as well. So if you want to hop on and follow our Philly Fed accounts on LinkedIn or Twitter and Instagram, please feel free to engage with us. We would really appreciate that. And then also I want to just let you know, if you didn't see, we do have conference Wi-Fi. So you'll just join, you click conference, there's the network and the password. Most of you should have like a Fed staff member at your pod. So if you have any questions about getting connected, they should be able to help you do that. Also on your table you should have an agenda, but there's this little plastic thing that has 2 QR codes on it. If you're interested in checking out the agenda with hyperlinks to the LinkedIn bios, you can do that there. We're trying to go green. So as our presenters come up, if you want to read a little bit more about their work and their background, please, feel free to connect through there. So finally, I will just say how thrilled we are to have a full room with you all today. And just by being here, representing all the different organizations, it's a testament that there has been a shift in the early care space. And we hope that that's a positive shift within the business community. So we are excited to hear from multiple stakeholders today and hear multiple perspectives about how childcare has touched your lives, the lives of your employees, and our neighbors as well. And our hope is that in these discussions, everyone will remain open to the differing perspectives that will be shared today, and that everyone will leave feeling really energized and a somewhat equal sense of responsibility to work together to move the early care sector forward in a way that's more equitable and works for everyone, including providers, working families, and of course, our earliest learners. So to give you a sense of who's in the room, we're going to practice a little technology that we're going to use throughout the day called Slido. So what we're going to do is go ahead and open up your phone or your laptop. Doesn't matter. If you go to sly.do in your browser, you should be able to just enter our hashtag, which is PHL Childcare. And you should be prompted for putting in your organization. And also right on your little plastic thing too is the sly.do if you forget. And as you answer, we should be able to get a sense for who's here. If you want to join by scanning the QR code, you can do that as well. We will be using Slido throughout the day, so we want to give everyone a chance to practice and also let you see who's here and get a sense for who is in the room. Yes, and you can also select more than one answer. So if you're representing multiple organizations, feel free to go ahead and do that. Awesome. Great, I'll just give folks a minute to get connected, and if you haven't used Slido before, also thank you for learning new technology with us. Oh, and also I should say thank you too for letting us shuffle you up. We were really excited to have, this sort of mix of stakeholders sitting together. There will be opportunities for discussion primarily at the break that we'll take for lunch. And we're just hopeful that being with different groups of people will help enrich the conversations that we'll have. Awesome, great. Yeah, I can see everyone's joining, moving bar is moving. So thanks for practicing. We will be using that throughout the rest of the agenda. Okay, awesome. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Julia Klein for our opening remarks. We are so grateful to have her here today. She is wearing multiple hats. She's the chairwoman and CEO of C.H. Briggs Company, but she also sits on our board of directors here at the Philadelphia Fed, and she's also a commissioner at the Early Learning Investment Commission. So she's a perfect person to kick us off today. I should say she's been such a great voice and advocate for the early care sector and how it impacts particularly female labor force participation. So we're thrilled to have you. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, all. Isn't it fun to be at the bank? How many people are here for the first time? But so more law enforcement per square foot than anyway. And do you know why? You know what's in the basement? Lots and lots of money. Well, I'm delighted to see the conference center filled with real live people. I've heard a couple of you say, "Oh, we've met on Zoom," and I keep thinking like, "Oh, you're much taller than I thought you were after a couple of years." As Sloan said, I'm wearing a number of hats today. I have the privilege to serve as a board director for the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, and as a commissioner on the Pennsylvania Early Learning Investment Commission, which is a gubernatorial appointment appointed by lots of different the last three governors, Republican and Democrats. And very important for our conversation today, I'm the mother of, I used to say a young adult, but now I have to say an adult son. But his early learning experiences at a Montessori school in Berks County were so pivotal to his development and to our family's life and to our businesses. So when I saw how critical really good early learning was for our family, I got interested in it on a policy level, but it took years to get the business community locally engaged in the issue because it seemed soft, story time and finger painting, not the work of manufacturing guys and industrialists. The brain science, though, and the trajectory data is absolutely irrefutable. And as soon as I got more data to make the case that all the programs that those industrialists and manufacturing guys were interested in, all the special college internship programs or college prep scholarships or career pathways in high school leading to manufacturing or reading by third grade, all of those efforts that the business community embraced, it became irrelevant because if a child's not ready for kindergarten, all the rest of the efforts will always be remedial and they'll always fall short. Period. End of story. The investment in fixing what could have been prevented is pro-business, it's pro-return on investment effort, and that's something that the business community clearly understands. It's not soft, although finger painting's fun, story time is great, but it's not soft, it's not partisan, and it's actually pretty simple. It's just kind of expensive. So it's my pleasure today to welcome you to our conversation on the business case for childcare. This is what we're here to talk about. I really believe that early learning is the nexus of labor force participation, healthy families, and a competitive workforce now and tomorrow. So this whole topic's been getting lots of play in our particular economic moment since the onset of the pandemic. So in wearing my various hats here, I see how important it is for business to be really invested in this conversation. At the national level, the Federal Reserve System is working to raise childcare as an economic issue that impacts our workforces. Here in the 3rd District, Philadelphia is the 3rd district of the Federal Reserve System. The Philly Fed's been engaged with community leaders to better understand local needs to help inform policy. So it's important to note that the Federal Reserve Bank doesn't set policy. It creates research for all of you to set policy. I guess another important thing to say is while we're here together in this conversation, we're also not setting interest rates, right? That's not what we're here to do today. So the Early Learning Investment Commission is appointed by the governor, and our job there is to connect the private sector with legislators to make the case for public investment in early learning and also to make connections across the private and nonprofit sectors so communities can really learn who's doing what, where, and how to do it better across our Commonwealth. You'll hear more from that about that from Andrea. Did I get that right? Okay, good. So today you're going to hear a lot from leaders who are working to break down the barriers that have caused the early care, early learning sector to experience what's really a history of underinvestment, making it very difficult for parents to access high quality care. And as important, for childcare professionals to grow their careers and grow their businesses. It's a really important element. To put it simply, many of our employees are parents, and parents need childcare. In 2020, 64% of all households with kids had all available parents in the labor force, 64%. And they're trying to get high quality, safe care for their kids in a broken system. We know that our whole dilemma here long predated COVID-19, but the pandemic made all of these hardships on parents and providers so much worse, with a huge impact on the business community and, of course, on families. The pressure that many parents are facing in the wake of the pandemic is not equal. Female labor force participation in the U.S. economy still has not recovered. I wrote an article in Forbes a couple months ago, probably more than it's probably a year ago at this point, about the hit to women's careers. And I bet I got 300 comments from employers saying, yes, the women, the high potential women that we've brought along, that we've invested in, they're gone. How are we going to get them back? One survey that Lean In conducted, 76% of women with kids under 10 stated that childcare has been one of their top 3 challenges during COVID, right? Staying alive, mental health, childcare. Senior level women are 1.5 more likely to think about downshifting their careers than their male counterparts. Some of that has gotten a bit better, I think, but the disparity is still there. We also see big racial disparities in childcare access. Parents of color were more likely to experience job disruptions during the pandemic, which makes recovering even more challenging, and the need for childcare more immediate. There's a huge reason to be concerned that the pandemic will have serious long-term effects on women's careers, workplace diversity, and without full labor force participation, everybody who wants to be back to work, our economy suffers. And we're not just talking about today's workforce or today's economy. Kids who have access to high quality early learning achieve a high financial return to regional economies, especially for children coming from low to moderate income households. This is some research out of the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis. The research that the Fed's able to do, and you'll hear some of that today, is remarkable and really can set us on the right path for policy. So great childcare policy, great early learning policy, supported by the business community, helps to prepare our region's future workforce and our country's future citizens. So when we invest, the business community will increase retention, increase productivity, increase diversity and leadership. And when we don't, we won't. And our economy today and tomorrow can't afford that. So my hope today is that everybody will leave here after our sessions really primed for action to address childcare challenges as a key component of our workforce infrastructure. And I really do think about this like the infrastructure bill. So Tom and I were talking earlier, the infrastructure bill had childcare and early learning as an important component that unfortunately didn't get passed. But when we think about infrastructure, the infrastructure of our workforce depends on getting this right. I'm really eager to hear from today's speakers on the whole menu of options that are available for employers and how to be a good partner in public and private investments in this space. And as you'll learn today, childcare supports from the private sector perspective go far beyond building an on-site early learning center in your office space. That's very unrealistic for most of us. I have a mid-market company in Reading. That's just not. It's not realistic. There are plenty of other options and lots of resources for you to explore. So with that, I'm going to offer my thanks to all the speakers and the Early Learning Investment Commission for being a great partner and also a catalytic engine in this space. And I'm looking to Andrea and her team, really thumbs up. And my thanks also to Sloan and the terrific economists and researchers here at the Fed. There are so many great brains in this room. We all share a commitment to growing our economy equitably into a future where every kid's ready for kindergarten and where parents are secure and growing at work. We all share a commitment to growing our economy, and our conversation today can be rocket fuel for all of those issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea, and I thank everybody for being here and hope we have a terrific conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. That was so well said. And again, I do have to extend my sincere thanks to Sloan and her team. We partnered together for the first time in early 2021. The business case for childcare, we didn't know was part one at the time because now we're in part two. And we really found such a synergy between the Early Learning Investment Commission and the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia and everything that Julia said. I mean, this is such a key to our economic growth and prosperity today and tomorrow. And so the fact that we are here with such an impressive group of stakeholders talking about quality childcare at the bank is just phenomenal. And I'm very confident that we will, as Julia said, leave here today with some very important action steps. And so I'm also very pleased that joining us today is the Early Learning Investment Commission's co-chair, Tom Foley. I am so fortunate to have an amazing executive committee. I'm looking at Kate Woods, and I have Hugh Lavery. Janet Haas is hopefully going to be here soon. But at the helm of that, I have Stephanie D'Oliveira, who is the Senior VP of HR at Sheets, and Tom Foley, who is the president of the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities of Pennsylvania. And Tom is so insightful and thoughtful about his guidance. He has deep expertise in the public sector. He was the former Secretary of Labor and Industry for the state of Pennsylvania. His nonprofit experience, he was the president of the United Way of Pennsylvania, and certainly in the work that he does, he is so in touch with the benefits of quality early learning and the way that it impacts higher education and other opportunities for children. And so I am going to ask Tom to join me and help set the stage, kind of the context for our day together.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you, Julia. Anybody needs to know what the real facts are on early childhood education, just read Julia's piece in Forbes. She wrote it in the context of the pandemic, but it underlines what for me is the most persuasive and valuable argument about all this. In my, 30-some year career in public policy, the two most overwhelming pieces of social science data for me are those charts that show your income depending on your education level. And even though you still make less if you're a woman and less if you're a minority, the chart still goes like this. The other piece of overwhelming social science data is those long-term trajectory studies that Julia referred to. Whether you're talking about educational attainment, home ownership, intersections with criminal justice system, et cetera, it's all positive, much more positive if kids start with a sound early care and education background. Let me say just three quick things. One, this has been a long march. We were laughing. I had to try to remember who it was. My labor and industry days are back in the 90s, so I'm really dating myself. But Tom Peters was the apostle at the time. Some of you probably weren't born when he was writing this, but Peters was really the first of those people really talking about the role of women in the workplace, not just as workers, but as leaders in the workplace. And it's the first time the issue of childcare was even on the plate. I was the head of a 6,000 person department. I worked under a governor who decided we should have childcare in state agencies. And the first agency that he allowed us to put one in was the State Department of Labor and Industry. We thought that would send a message. That's sort of the workplace center. The journey here has been long. It goes back to that some of you may remember, some of you will not. The police commissioner in this town many years ago was a guy named John Timoney. Timoney appeared at a microphone in this city with me. I think I was the president of the United Way at the time, and Mr. Rogers. We all remember Mr. Rogers. But again, that's how long ago this march started in Pennsylvania. And at the time that Mr. Rogers and John Timoney, chief law enforcement officer in some senses in the state, were doing this was because we didn't have any public money in Pennsylvania back in the 90s invested in early care and education. That's hard to believe. We were eventually the 43rd state. We had no public money until Ed Rendell was governor. So it's been a long march. Second comment, it's been a united march, the largest single caucus in this state legislature. And you know how divided our legislatures are, and we're seeing it now as we decide who's really running the House. The largest single caucus in that legislature is the Early Care and Education Caucus. Nobody else is even close. People get it that this is important. We've had now 5 successive gubernatorial administrations who get it, beginning with the governor I worked for, Governor Casey, creating child care centers. Governor Ridge and Governor Schweiker actually sponsored the study. We had to do a formal study in the state before we could get public money devoted to this. They did the study. They appointed Marilyn Ware, who had chaired Governor Ridge's campaign, a very prominent businesswoman in Pennsylvania, to lead that and got those results. When Governor Rendell was running, we got all of the child care groups together with the United Way. We did a white paper. We got both candidates to agree to it, Governor Rendell and his opponent, Mike Fisher, that they would invest. And that was the first money. And everybody, got on board pretty quickly. Governor Corbett continued that investment. Governor Wolf set some new records on the investment. So it's really been a united march. We're still mourning the loss of our legislative leader on this, which was a guy named Pat Brown, who was defeated in a primary. He's from Lehigh Valley. This guy was there from the beginning, the first. I remember being on platforms with him in Harrisburg, and before he was even appropriations chair, and engineered a lot of what we did over the years. And we're really looking hard to how we're going to replace him. So it's been a united march. People do get it now, I think, generally in political world, and I think in the business world. The last thing I want to say is that big hurdles still remain in this march, and that's why gatherings like this one today are so important. The investment has to come from both government and from business. Julia mentioned, I wrote an op-ed piece with Stephanie on the fact that childcare is infrastructure and should be viewed as infrastructure. And as Julia pointed out, we didn't win that debate. But that is how it has to be looked at. If we continue to pay childcare workers $10 and less an hour, we're not going to have quality childcare. And that has to be a mission both for government and for business to encourage government, but business to make investments as well. I think we've hit all the other hurdles. I don't think anybody doubts now the importance and the value of quality early care and education. We now have to get them to understand, in order to do that, we have to invest. We have to put our money where our words are, both in the private sector and in the public sector. So it's been a long march, but it's been a united march. I don't know that there's another issue in Harrisburg, Andrea, where people are so in agreement on this. I don't care who we're talking to. I just talked to the two new likely appropriations chairs, and they both get it. But it's also a march that still has major hurdles, and that's why we need these kind of events at the Fed. Wish we could just take all that money from the basement and put it in. But I don't think that's going to happen because Bruce Willis is not in town today. But anyway, thank you very much. We really appreciate all of you being here. Andrea and her terrific team, Sloan and her team, and all our commissioners who are here, who have been now through, I think it's 4 governors, Hugh, I think 4 different governors have appointed commissioners to this, and we're really pleased to be a part of this effort today. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Tom. Very well said. So our objectives for today, and I'm going to hold us to this because we're going to revisit them at the end of the day. But we are going to leave here with a better understanding of some multiple dimensions of the business case for childcare. We're going to identify and adopt an action step. And I'm hoping that it's 2 action steps, because I think what we're going to learn today is that there's some very low-hanging, easy kind of fruit steps that we can take. And there are also some more complex initiatives that we can consider and get involved in. We're going to explore, on that note, some organizational, some community, and some system-wide strategies to kind of help guide our action steps. And we're going to consider the different advocacy tiers that we as individuals and as business leaders, as community members, can undertake as well to move the system. And so, like we said, I mean, Sloan and I have discussed this many times. Like, you are in the room because you were invited to be in the room. When we did our, meeting, our big webinar in 2021, we had a very large audience. And so we had to kind of start a little bit with the brain science and, kind of more of those longitudinal studies of why. But we don't necessarily need to do that today, but we felt that it was really important that we did give different briefings on the why. Right? So we can kind of, again, set the stage. And I am very briefly going to talk about the 2-generation return on investment. When we look at the workforce, and we talked about that a little bit, but we know, and again, this is back when Tom was talking about when the Early Learning Investment Commission started. So much of that conversation was grounded in the longitudinal studies like the Perry Preschool Project and the Abecedarian Project, in which we saw unequivocally these long-term benefits, particularly for at-risk children who had access to high-quality early learning, from greater school success, higher reading and math scores, greater graduation rates, greater rates of employment, and lower costs in remediation and the criminal justice system. And when the pandemic happened, we also then were able to, in a very concrete way, add on this piece that while quality childcare is quality early learning and so important for the generation of tomorrow, parents are so reliant on that quality childcare to go to work, to stay at work, and to advance at work. And so the results of kind of both this today and tomorrow, look at the benefits, is why we're here at the bank, right? It's return on investment. We know that to have the cost savings of quality ECE, and I've seen the studies anywhere from $1 invested yields $7 return up to $27 return, depending on, kind of what are those cost benefits that you're measuring or gauging. But we know unequivocally that, and you know what, hold on just a second. Oh, I have a nice little slide to show this. There we go. Yeah, so we know that when we have the quality early learning, that society is going to benefit from those higher tax revenues and lower costs that are related to the remedial education and justice system. And what we know is when we don't invest in quality early learning, we see these detrimental results, right? We're in a current staffing crisis. We have insufficient access to quality, the closure of classrooms and centers, and an incredibly important part of our labor force is reliant on public assistance. And so we see this vicious cycle, but when we do invest in quality early learning, we're able to reverse that cycle, and then we reap the positive both for children of today and children of tomorrow. And so I'm going to go ahead at this point and ask our Dimensions of Why panelists to come to the table. We have Sloan Kaiser, who you met, the Community Engagement Associate for the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Renee Androkidis, Coordinator of Economic Competitiveness, the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. And Christina Valdez, the Executive Director of Along the Way. Okay.
Awesome. So I'm gonna, you've already heard from me, so I'm gonna be brief and work to make us up on a little bit of time. But as Andrea said, we wanted to have an opportunity to level set a little bit, understanding everyone is coming from different organizations and industries and perspectives. So I just wanted to, I love giving this presentation. This is like a Fed presentation because I'm going to throw some numbers at you. So I should also mention these slides will be available if you're interested in them. But I'm going to talk just about the economics of care from the supply and demand side a little bit, first starting with the demand side. And just to give you a snapshot, 57% of people in Pennsylvania do live in a childcare desert. And so if you're not familiar with that term, that's a census tract with more than 50 children under the age of 5 that contains either no childcare providers or so few options that there are more than 3 times as many children as there are licensed childcare slots. And so we know that this can lead to long wait times, labor force decisions, and opportunity costs a lot of times for families and caregivers, or turning to informal networks of care. So on with that, we also know, we heard today, that it's expensive. And the Department of Health and Human Services says that 7% is really the affordability metric that a family should spend on childcare. And high-income families spend just under 7%. And families, and I should say this is for center-based care, and families with low income spend almost 40%. So it's a huge cost, and I will also just say families with young children, which again is 0 to 5, spend an even larger proportion of their income on care. So it's really, really expensive. And only 14% of families who are eligible receive subsidies. This is a little bit of an older statistic from 2017, but I share it just because if you don't have children, or if you don't work, closely with people who do have children, sometimes I think the cost can be a little bit shocking. And in a lot of cases, it's actually larger than what families will spend for higher education. And as Andrea mentioned, the value of quality care for our 0 to 5 learners has such a high return on investment, that it's so critical that, if should a family want to put their child into a childcare program, that they have an option to be able to do so. So it's, why we're all here. So moving quickly through, again, very to go on with what Julia mentioned, to give you a little bit of snapshot on how this can affect families and parents' decisions. This is, to orient you, a slide looking at labor force participation for parents in 3rd district states. So that's Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. And you can kind of see here, we have non-parents, and then we have mothers and fathers, and then also mothers and fathers with children 0 to 5. And what's really interesting here that I want to point out is this is a little bit of a snapshot of what was going on during the pandemic. So we aggregated by 6-month intervals, and you can see mothers with young children or not had the largest drop in labor force participation compared to their male counterparts. But what maybe is even more interesting is that other groups were able to recoup their losses, whereas mothers, and particularly mothers with young children, were not able to. So we know that this isn't the only reason, that female labor force participation or parental labor force participation was impacted, but it's a contributing factor, and therefore can also be a strategy to help mitigate some of the disparities that we see in labor force participation. So now to move on to the supply side. Again, I think most of you probably know this, but providing care is really expensive. So a lot of times we get asked, why doesn't the market reach equilibrium? If there's this great demand for care, why isn't there more childcare availability? So just to give a little bit of background, the majority of revenue costs at childcare centers come from family tuition payments, which means it's really difficult to raise wages, which is oftentimes one of the biggest challenges in getting and growing staff in a childcare center without raising rates on the backs of parents. So it's already really expensive to raise wages for staff. It would make it more expensive for parents. So I should also just point out, if you're not aware, wages are relatively low for ECE professionals, and Black and Latino early care teachers earn less than white early care teachers, which I think Julia alluded to earlier, some of the racial disparities that exist within the sector. And then finally, the last thing that I'll say here is I just wanted to provide a little bit of a snapshot of how early care work compares to other professions that are sometimes grouped with early care, preschool teachers and kindergarten teachers. And again, this is a comparison of third district states. But just to reiterate that this really is a separate and sole issue from professionals who are working in the K through 12 system or who are working in preschool centers. It's low paying work. And it's very difficult to raise wages without making it more expensive for parents. So I'll just end it there. I just wanted to be able to give a little bit of a snapshot of some of the data that drives us to look at these issues and context for why it's a constrained market and it doesn't always naturally reach its sort of equilibrium point.
Thank you so much, Sloan. Yeah, that is definitely an important component. We've got the return on investments, we have the economics of care, and back in 2020, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce did a study in Pennsylvania in which we saw this huge number, $3.47 billion is lost to the state of Pennsylvania as a result of insufficient childcare. Majority of that is direct costs from businesses, in turnover, absenteeism, presenteeism, and of course the lost tax revenue. But that's a big number. It's really hard for businesses to wrap their head around. And we are very fortunate to have Christina give us a tool.
Renee.
Oh,
yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just kind of went, go back. Okay. I'm going to go to Renee. And Renee is going to talk to us about how Philadelphia can look at the Metropolitan Livability Index.
That's right. Thanks so much. I'm Renee Andrikaitis. I'm a coordinator at the Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to give a little bit of context for why I'm talking about this. So in the spring of 2020, the Chamber formed this partnership of about 150 business leaders in the region. A lot of you were a part of these discussions. We called it the Recharge and Recover PHL initiative. And out of that initiative, those leaders came up with 5 aspirations for what our region could become if we really focused on a recovery from COVID in an equitable and inclusive way. So one of those aspirations was for our community to become more healthy, more livable for the people who are here and for the people and businesses that we're trying to attract to our region. So, to know if we're improving upon that, we kind of had to get a sense of where we were. So to do this, we worked with Steve's great team at eConsult. So thank you, Steve, and your team for all of that work, to conduct a study that helped us put a finger on the pulse of how we were doing, but also on how 7 peer regions were doing. So we could really contextualize that and get a little bit deeper than just what numbers were saying. And so, the report, which we call the Metropolitan Livability Index, it measures 10 factors of livability, and one of those is childcare availability, so access to childcare facilities. So what you see on this slide behind me are the results of that research, that piece of the research. And you can see that we rank 4th out of 8 regions in terms of the number of childcare facilities available per 1,000 children under age 5. So that's that under school age child set. And this data gives us some information about the density of childcare deserts or the lack thereof in different regions. And so childcare deserts in our region are found in suburban areas as well as urban areas. They're a problem across the region. But nationally, and we've alluded to this a little bit already, they are more concentrated in those urban low-income communities. So nationally, that's where they're focused. In our region, they're a problem everywhere. So actually, as Sloan said, about half of Americans live in these childcare deserts, which has a deep and profound impact on the workforce, as you can imagine, on workforce composition. And we're all familiar with that talking point, right? That women have not yet returned to the workforce in pre-pandemic numbers the way that men have. But there's a little bit more to that than we say with face value, right? Like that's about 1 million women who have not returned to the workforce yet. And so, their labor force participation is still behind where it was. And that's a problem not only because women are often the ones expected to stay at home with the children, but they're also the ones who are working in this education and health services field, right? So it's not that that's the only field women work in, but compared to men in that field, there are more women operating there. So there are also about 16,000 childcare facilities that closed during the pandemic. 80 of those were in Philadelphia city, not the region. They were in the city specifically. So when we look at these two figures together, right, 1 million women still out of the workforce and all of these closing childcare facilities, we start to really get a full picture of the impact that this is having. So, this to me is really the epitome of the business case for childcare. Because while there are 16,000 facilities that closed, that doesn't count the ones that are operating in a limited capacity, the ones that are just trying to get by or taking the kind of overrun from those facilities that did close. And so, having a lack of childcare being such a big reason for parents to leave the workforce is a huge economic disruption for all of us, not just for those who are forced to stay home because of this. It costs the national economy $57 billion a year. And, there are reductions, obviously, in overall revenue, in our tax base, and our workforce size, not to mention the difference and the difficulties in attracting new businesses and new workforce to our region where they don't feel like they will have that support when they come here. So, there are really structural issues here, of course, the salary rates and those kinds of things that will take a really nuanced approach to address. But, I think that there are ways that we could do this, right? So the Chamber has developed what we're calling the Southeastern Pennsylvania Business and County Partnership. So that's a public-private partnership that's addressing these issues. And while they weren't designed specifically for addressing childcare deserts, this is one of the pieces that this group is interested in driving forward. So we're really interested in seeing how that true public-private partnership can impact this work and specific to Philadelphia in comparison to those other regions.
Thank you so much, Renee. And yes, having the Chamber of Commerce, really understand this piece is absolutely key. And now I did already give a great introduction to Christina, but you see I was going right down the line, maybe alphabetical, no. But Christina, so we've really started, kind of large. We looked at the return on investments. We looked at the economics of childcare. We really looked at how this affects, the business and growth and, just even the sustainability of a community like Philadelphia. But how do businesses really kind of take this down to what is it really, how is it affecting my bottom line?
Yeah, so glad you asked. So I'm Christina. I'm the director of Along the Way. We provide in-home childcare for single parents to go to work who do shift work. And when I was talking with Andrea a few months ago, she said Louisiana Policy Institute has this great calculator that just came out. And so I tracked it down and I was in there and I was fiddling around and I thought, wow, this is really great. But, we're a long way from Louisiana. And so I started thinking I wonder if this would be similar with Pennsylvania statistics. And so we contacted the Louisiana Policy Institute and they so graciously said, well, here's our template. Feel free to adapt it to Pennsylvania so it works for Pennsylvania businesses. And so we did that. And I'm going to show you the calculator now. We worked with a team. McClanahan and Associates, who are outside of this Philadelphia area, who are regionally and nationally known as evaluators, a small woman-owned firm. And they've really been thought partners. They created this calculator, and it's available on our website for use for any business in Pennsylvania. Before I take you to the calculator, though, I just want to include two caveats. One is that the MAI team scoured the internet looking for the most up-to-date research so that we can put statistics in there that were relevant for today. And while that worked for the most part, there were some statistics that were significantly outdated, but that was the last data point that we had. So even as far back as 2011. And so a partnership opportunity, as I see it among the stakeholders in this room, is to work to get primary research to fill those gaps and make this tool even more robust. And then the second caveat is that this is for general use for businesses, but as along the way and our research team was building the calculator, we realized that for our agency, who specializes in helping employers that require shift workers to run their operation, this calculator wasn't quite the full picture. And so if you're a business owner in the room and you're thinking to yourself, well, I have shift workers, or I'm in an industry that's way more turnover than normal, please reach out to me and you can book a meeting on the website, and then I can just go through that more detailed calculator. Okay. So we created this, and this is just the frequently asked questions. So I'm just going to scoot down to here. So we created this with some defaults in there, but any field that's in beige is what you would put in for your business. And so we took a medium-sized business as an estimate of 250 workers. $26.51 is the average wage of a LPN, which is an industry that we work with very closely, nursing and nurses' aides. And then we estimated that this is based on a statistic, 35.6. So we extended the childcare all the way up to 17 because we know that there's been school closures. We know that schools, inclement weather, summer break, vacations, kids getting sick. Like there's so many different things that, but you could plug in if you had a specific age range percentage. You could plug in those numbers and easily use this calculator that you wanted to look at, like 0 to 6 or something. And so this auto calculates, so I guess maybe we'll do, just so you guys could see it in action. Okay, so it auto populates, and if you have 300 employees, an estimated 107 of them have children that need care at some point in time, and then the losses are all the way at the bottom here. And it's broken down as the total losses that your company is incurring currently, like at this time. And then it's broken down by all employees with and without children, because we know that none of us are in a vacuum, right? And then the cost that your company is incurring for parents that are employees. So, I think what Andrea and I were hoping is that this calculator would be a concrete tool to take the, $3.47 billion, which is pre-pandemic, and drill it down to like, what is it currently costing your business in this day? And how can we divert, or how could you divert the dollars that are already being spent through passive loss and divert it to something that is proactive, that's going to help your workforce, that's going to invest in children and families and create resilience in the economy? Because either way, the money is being spent. That's all I have.
Christina, thank you so much. Yeah, we were just thrilled to be able to have this tool, and really, this is pretty much launching it, right, Christina?
Yeah, launching it. I was up last night tweaking it, making sure that it looked like that.
So, and again, it is just remarkable because sometimes those really large figures just seem like, wow, how does that really relate to me? But I think that this is, when we look at the dimensions of why, that this is a tool to see like, this is how this is affecting my bottom line as a business. So But I'd like to open up the panel to any questions that you might have. Yes, Julia.
Just a suggestion for the next couple lines on the calculator. I think the retention, turnover, the costs in turnover are invisible. Make them visible, very compelling. So it's the promotions not earned, people who have left, the recruiting costs to find them, the work to fill the gaps. Those are huge costs that, when made visible, makes us strong. Great team.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a second calculator actually. I don't know if I mentioned that at the beginning, that has some more of that, but it's geared towards the high turnover industries because they're incurring such significant losses like healthcare. They have to staff. You have to have a patient to staff ratio to maintain. And so you might be getting staffing agencies and overtime is the norm. And, there's hemorrhaging money. So we have a calculator and I'd be happy to walk you through that at some point.
Yeah, I think Alice, did you have a question?
So this is great. I just literally spent 2 weeks building something like this. But I just wanted to say I'm with Bright Horizons, and maybe we can partner with updating some of that research.
Great.
Yes.
Just to go upstream from the previous question.
Oh, yes. If you click the button on the mic, so the green light, perfect. Thank you.
Just to go upstream from the previous question, what does the research or data say about better recruiting on the front end? You're able to draw from a wider pool of potential employees in the first place. Is there any research or data on that yet?
So from the Federal Reserve perspective, in terms of, you're talking about recruiting employees not in the ECE space, correct? Like you're just talking about general broad. Yep. Okay. So, so we do have some research more generally around barriers to employment, and I'd be happy to share it with you. Childcare is included in that work, among other things, broadband access, transportation, but thinking about also the context in which businesses are operating and understanding what their local workforce is comprised of, and then really being able to target strategies around that local context. So I'll be happy to share that with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, we definitely look at childcare. We know that it is a barrier. It was a top 5 barrier in 2019 under the governor's Keystone Economic Development study that they did. But we also know that it is a huge boon in this area, age of competitiveness, to be a family-friendly business, and that can look many different ways. And we're gonna touch on that in a little bit.
And I just wanted to add that there will be some research that will be coming out because we, along the way, is undergoing a 3-year pilot in Montgomery County to partner with employers. And there's a robust evaluation plan of that. But we're basically taking unemployed and underemployed single mothers that are not in the workforce and helping them re-enter the workforce because we're providing the in-home childcare for the highest turnover industries. So it's pending, that, and that's the first project of its kind that I know of. And to Andrea's point, I'll just add that, 68% of employees believe that their employer does not care about them. So that, I don't know what says I care about you more than giving childcare to parents. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, in multiple different ways to support that. Yes. Absolutely. So now I'd like, yes.
Yeah, I just want to do that. I'm Somali. We work a lot with business, especially small business. I mean, I just became a mother during the pandemic myself, so I know that is so important to have childcare. And I'm glad to have kids all that can watch my daughter during that time. But in a workforce like us, sometimes flexibility of being home is lessened. But to think about small business that work from home, have to, before coming to this conference, I have to deal with one of the small business who owns a salon, who is a single mother, have a 3 or 4 years old son, which is also a disability son, which just needs a lot of help. The childcare around the neighborhood is not available. Or even though the spot open, it's not fit with what he needs because he's special needs. So she has to drive 40 minutes one way. So it's like almost 2 hours away from the salon for a 2-hour program. And 5 goes out and come back. So she just waited. So by the time she could open the store, it's like 2 o'clock already. So this is something that I don't know how to brainstorm this when it comes to special needs single mother who has to be at the store to run the business. So this is not a question, I guess. Yeah. This is a real need in the community, especially small business that have to run and dependent solely on this business income.
Thank you very much for sharing that. You bring up a really interesting point about, childcare being challenging in and of itself, but when you add in, children who may have special needs or disabilities, it can even add to that complexity. So thank you for bringing that to the topic. Okay, and now we'd like you to take out your phones. Yes. And while we're answering Hugh's question, if you could type in to Slido, what's your why? What's your top of mind? Why are you here today? What do you hope to accomplish? Yes.
Hi, Hugh Lavery from Jefferson. And this may be part of a separate part of the program. I look at the agenda, but what's being done to address the delta between the teachers, the workers in basic ed versus with the benefit structure versus those that are in early childhood education? We've seen some successes in Boston with then Mayor Marty Walsh, Governor Charlie Baker. But in terms of Pennsylvania, I think there's something we need to think about, because while we have nothing against basic ed, if there's a constant with young people wanting to go into childhood education, they're majoring in college, getting their master's, and then they see a compensation level at a certain amount with the benefit structure in another part of the education industry, they're getting pulled away, and it's not sustainable. So I think it's almost something, again, it may be part of the subsequent discussions, but thought I'd bring it up at the front end for us to think about it, because it's sort of simple human behavior and economics. And I think it's something that's a foundational challenge we've had over the past many years. So thank you.
I really appreciate your question, and I'll just, the Federal Reserve System does have a childcare working group that is launching a research series around this in the spring about how to build out a sustainable supply of providers, and help bring investments into the industry that will incentivize professionals to stay and not jump to the K through 12 system, which right now is a really natural jump. You're paid more and you receive benefits. There are some models across the country, specifically in Washington, D.C., that have done this really creatively. So I'd be happy to share more, but I really appreciate your point bringing it up. So thank you.
Yeah, and absolutely, Hugh. I mean, this is where that systems change really comes into play. And I know my and Children First will talk about a wage study that they've just completed, in which we really see what childcare providers are earning, which is, as you can imagine, unacceptable. But this is where we also see some private sector efforts that are trying to, put a Band-Aid on this. It's not a long-term sustainable effort, but they're really trying to infuse some private dollars into the compensation structure for early childhood providers to be able to kind of retain the quality that already exists without losing it further. So I think there are multiple strategies, but absolutely, I know we could kind of dive into like subsidy reimbursement rates and those type of things, but it is an incredibly important topic, because quality staffing is the key to quality programming and quality outcomes. Yes, Tim.
So my name is Tim Phelps, and I run a transportation organization. And one of the things that I continue to advocate for in transportation, we deal with the origin and destination. of an individual. As we look at the childcare needs, do we look at the childcare needs from origin or a destination point? Because as we look at a system of transportation here in the Delaware Valley, those that do not drive, that take public transportation, how does someone make a choice of where that childcare provider should be? So as you look at that work, I would really encourage you to ask that question: is it best at the origin or is it best at the destination?
No, thank you for that point. And I think for time's sake, we'll go ahead and transition now. And thank you so much for your Slido responses here. I think it's really interesting to just see where people's heads are at after the dimensions of why. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you very much for thinking about what your why is. And I think this is a really good transition. We are hoping that you're leaving here today with some tools, and I'm very pleased to talk to you about a tool that we have developed called Investments in Caring PA. And this, again, came from a study. We partnered with the Pennsylvania Chamber after the U.S. Chamber study came out in the midst of the pandemic, trying to determine, what was the impact of childcare on business and the workforce kind of in the height of the pandemic. And certainly what we found was no surprise. I mean, yes, the majority of businesses attributed the loss of their employees primarily to no childcare or insufficient childcare. But what our key takeaway was from this survey is that the majority of businesses who responded indicated that they wanted to do better to help their working families and childcare, but they really didn't know what the options were. And like Julia said, so much of that mindset was like opening up an on-site childcare center. And what we really understood to be true is there are many ways in which an employer can support their working families and childcare. And so we know that there is such great research and data and tools that is out there, but for a business, it's very piecemeal. You can go on, the Ocdel website or the Compass website, or Children First has access to amazing data. But as a business, we really wanted to make this cohesive, almost one-stop shop. And so I'm going to be very conscious of time, but this is kind of our two-generation workforce issue. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to understand a little bit more of what is actually in our toolkit. And it is investmentsincaringpa.com. It's how you access the website. And we have the data and the resources to help you determine and understand the need. And, again, some of this we didn't recreate, but we have amazing work that's done from Pennsylvania Partnerships for Children. They work with the Annie E. Casey, Kids Count data, where you can take the information and find out what's happening in your state, what's happening in your community, what's happening in your school district, to help you really understand what access is. There are templates and calculators, and now Christina's calculator, how I always will call it, Christina's calculator, is linked on to that. And we also have living expense calculators, so you can really get a feel for how your employees, many of whom may be making entry-level wages, how childcare costs fit into their basic necessities, like transportation, like food and housing. You can also have ways to share information with families. Okay, and so we talked about, I mentioned it briefly, like a low-hanging fruit, right? Providing information to families does not take a lot of effort, especially when you have a toolkit like Investments in Caring PA that's going to give you what you need, but it can speak volumes. Okay, so another hat I wear is I am an adjunct professor for graduate social work students. And what I do is I really help guide them through their internship. So it's like kind of the signature pedagogy is your hands-on learning in your placements. And this semester, we start off and we do shared learning, and everybody kind of gives a presentation about where they're placed and all, what their responsibilities are, governance structure, mission. And so at the end of the semester, which was just, last week, I talk about the Pennsylvania Early Learning Investment Commission. Like I follow the same rubric, and I had a student, Gabby, stand up, and she said, I have two children, a child who is 7 and a child that is 4. And she said, and I just found out about pre-K counts. I had no idea. She said, I had no idea. She said, I was taking my children to the church nursery school, and I really liked that because they were, able to go into the church and there's faith-based. But she said, but I just found out about pre-K counts. And she said, number one, I can't believe she works at Children and Youth. So she is making an entry-level salary. Also, in social work, a lot of times your internships are not paid, which big problem there. And she said, but I can see such a difference. My child just loves going to school and sharing what she's learned. And I thought, what a low-hanging fruit, especially for a county organization, to be proactive, whether it's your HR department or, the person who is handling employee relations. When an employee announces that they're going to have a baby, it's like, oh my gosh, how wonderful. Look, here's some resources for you, having a, snapshot in your employee portal or your employee newsletter. We heard, a story where childcare is so impossible to find and parents are piecing together things. Well, imagine if being able to connect the caregivers with Pennsylvania's Promise for Children, where they have developmental guidelines, and PNCs, Grow Up Great, where they have activities that you can do. I mean, to me, when I say a low-hanging fruit, I know, and I think it might have been Rashonda, there's nothing that's cost-free. I'm like, I know, but this is it just to me is like a no-brainer. And I think that every employer in Pennsylvania, Alex, should have access to Investments in Caring PA Toolkit and have that as part of the mission. It's at the very fundamental level, our HR department is going to understand what quality is, and we're going to make sure that our employees have easy access to it. And it would have made such a difference for Gabby. Okay, and I'm getting my little 5-minute thing. Thank you so much. And so many children across the Commonwealth. And so I also want to say that Investments in Caring PA also will give you opportunities to access technical assistance. And I do have Karen Grimm Thomas. And Karen, I don't know if you want to stand up or wave your hand or something, but Creative Childcare Solutions. So we're going to take a little snapshot. We don't have time to go through the whole toolkit, but it's a lot that's in there. But when you look at this section, it really talks about kind of internal policies and external activities. You can be a little overwhelmed, right? This is a lot. How am I going to, be able to figure this out? I don't have the capacity. I don't have the time. I don't have the background. Well, Creative Childcare Solutions is an opportunity. It's kind of pay for service, but they do a free landscape assessment to help guide employers who are really serious about taking that next step, but might not have the capacity to do it on their own. And then also incredibly important are ways to advocate. The Early Learning Investment Commission, we are non-lobbying, non-partisan, but we do so much good by doing education and raising awareness and connecting with whether it's our legislators, clearly the business leaders, nonprofit leaders, stakeholders, community members. And so, there are many ways to do this, but as, business leaders, there is a remarkable range of opportunities to connect with advocacy organizations to make your voice matter and add to a big list that makes it hard for our government to ignore. Hugh brought up a big thing with compensation. We've made some significant strides in Pennsylvania with things like, subsidy reimbursement rates, but we absolutely have a long way to go. And as we said, quality staff is key to quality outcomes. And so I'm just very quickly, because I know we're out of time, but this is the homepage. And if you'll notice that gold box, how to access quality childcare, how to help employees find quality childcare. And so when you click on that, that will take you again to resources that already exist, CCIS, being able to contact your local early learning resource center, type in your zip code, find what's available, find if it's quality. That's right there. Like I said, easy, simple, but can make such a big difference. We have divided the toolkit into 4 different categories. The need and the impact is where you're going to find the data and, the statistics to be able to support your why. This is where Christina's calculator is going to live. It doesn't already. I think Sarah might have connected it. Going to look at business strategies at work. This is where you're looking at your HR benefits, your policies, investing to increase access. One of my favorite parts of this component of the toolkit are our case studies. And we're going to mention a case study when we move along a little bit further into the program. But this is where we lift up examples of private sector initiatives that are really making a big difference in our community. And advancing quality care is looking at that system level change that you could make. And so, I have a lot of information in here. I'm not going to go through everything because I wanted to provide this after our presentation so you can look through it and hopefully peruse the website, our toolkit. But I just want to quickly highlight this because we are going to be talking about the York County example, which I do have on your table, their most recent report. It's a brand new initiative, so kind of their first report. But the ABK Collaborative is what's happening in Pittsburgh. And this is an example of a high quality 24-hour child care center on the first floor of the City Housing Authority of Pittsburgh. And so the residents have an opportunity to have high quality child care for their children while they're doing work. And after they get employed, chances are, like Christina said, you're not working a 9-to-5 job. You can be doing shift work. And so they have access to childcare. And Duquesne University is the third partner that comes in, and they provide the education to increase the quality of the staff, as well as then their students are getting hands-on learning and meeting students and family where they are. And it's just this amazing collaborative reciprocal learning experience. So we have good examples in the toolkit as well, and we're looking to add more. This is information on creative childcare solutions, which we mentioned, and we can just go on from there. So look at that, time for Q&A. Really quick overview, but I think you really get the gist that this is a toolkit that is filled with resources. And I would love you to enter into Slido, what are your investings in the Caring PA toolkit? What are your takeaways? Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes. This is fantastic. Although I would say that I would definitely be voting for a Philadelphia area employer-initiated childcare project. It needs to be highlighted as a case study. And while people are still entering in their Slido responses, does anybody have a question for me? Yes.
Sorry. I just wondered if there would be broad dissemination of these resources amongst the business community in Philadelphia and across the state.
Yes, with assistance. We would love to. I mean, we are going to provide all of this information to all of you. You know, I'm making like big eyes at Alex, you know, with the TA chamber. But yes, anything that we can do, because I will tell you, we have really just started doing some really intensive outreach about investments in caring PA. But, you know, that is our goal. That is our goal. Yes, Alex.
So HR teams are notoriously bad at communicating benefits, even the ones they pay millions of dollars for. So I wonder if maybe there's a way to communicate some of this through the insurance groups in the area to include in sort of their, a lot of times what they send out when they're notified that a member is pregnant, they send out a package. Like this might be an interesting way to get to them because honestly, HR teams are just terrible at communicating.
That is brilliant.
Saying that as an HR person.
I know.
Yeah,
so
right,
I know.
Yeah. I'm not, yeah.
But yeah, absolutely, because we do have, I think we put in a proposal for the spring HR conference that's held with the PA Chamber, and certainly we have Stephanie D'Oliveira connecting us with SHRM, but the insurance company, that's really, really a great suggestion. Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Does anybody else have a question? Yes. Yes, that is absolutely a goal. You know, we would need a little assistance with that, but I think that if it is well received, absolutely, we would love to partner with you on that and see how we can make that a reality, because I agree, that is incredibly important. I think my daughter's school district's website was actually in like 27 different languages. I was like, wow, but yes, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, all right. And with that, we are going to take a 10-minute break, and I'm going to review the Slido responses. Thank you very much. Okay, I am very happy to kick off our next section of our agenda. We are now going to have a targeted systems initiatives discussion. And so we're very grateful that Steve Ray, who is a senior VP and principal of eConsult Solutions, moderate this conversation for us. We have Rashonda Perryman, who is the senior manager of philanthropy for Vanguard. We have Suzanne Morris, who is the VP for policy and partnership development at Teachstone, plus a nice background with early learning, and Mai Miksic, the Director of Early Childhood Policy at Children's First. Okay, and I'll just hand it off to you.
Turn on the mic. There we go. Good morning, everybody. Pleased to be here. As Andrea said, I'm pleased to work for Andrea half my time as an ELIC commissioner, and it's been great to reconnect with a bunch of people. Let me give you real quick before we start a little bit of my background. I'm currently a principal at eConsult Solutions. We're an economic consulting firm here in Philadelphia. We do a lot of work with workforce and a lot of other areas. But I think my creds for being on ELIC came from my time as executive director of the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia, where I worked with folks like Shirley and Tyrone and everybody else as one of the founding partners of Pre-K for PA, also Rashonda and Suzanne. And so had the opportunity to be the business rep of a group of advocates and others as a part of that. And you know, if I look back at my time at the Economy League, that's one of the things that I look at and say, that's something real that happened that impacted people. And the thousands of Pennsylvanians who are now getting high quality pre-K as a result of the work of that coalition is something that a systems change that is happening and is really working in Pennsylvania. So what we're going to be talking about today is systems change, and an opportunity to think about how do you target systems to deliver more childcare, more affordable childcare, and in the right place and in the places that it's needed. What we're going to talk about, and you've got three experts. I'm going to, I've done my talking. I'm going to shut up and just ask a few questions. But we're going to provide examples of partnerships and initiatives that stakeholders have deployed to address childcare challenges at the organizational and systems level. What we're going to try to highlight are how do you get internal alignment? How do you develop public-private partnerships? How do you do what we might call tiered advocacy? How are you hitting grass tops, grassroots, different levels of folks? And then we're going to also make sure that we're keeping a focus on equity. How are we doing this in a way that we're reaching people all across our communities? How are we making sure that those who can't afford it can, and do it in a way that really makes sense? Let me start on with Suzanne Morris is going to be my first victim in terms of asking questions. And what we're going to try to do is provide some broad examples from across the state and other states. And we're really lucky to have folks who know all of that. Let's start with Suzanne. Suzanne, you've got an incredible background. Take a picture of the QR code, look up Suzanne's background because you're going to understand she's advocacy. She was in the belly of the beast in terms of the department and others. But you've been doing some work with Pittsburgh, which, by the way, when Renee was putting up the slide on the Metropolitan Livability Index, which actually my firm did, as Renee said, if you noticed, we had Philadelphia 4th. Pittsburgh was 7th out of those cities. And so you're working with Pittsburgh on a really kind of interesting public-private collaborative in Allegheny County. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And for our folks here, just to kind of put a little shout out for our neighbors that are not too far away. They have been thinking very collaboratively in terms of how they can come together. And it was really driven by an allocation that was made by the Heinz Endowments to Grantmakers of Western Pennsylvania, which is a collaborative group that supports many family foundations and philanthropic partners in the Pittsburgh area. And with this allocation, it helped develop a collaborative table with several other philanthropic organizations that have been investing in the early childhood space for a number of years to start to align their strategies and then think about the leverage opportunities to bring new voices to the table. So one of the early initiatives that they've adopted, and this is just getting underway. This has only been a couple of months that they've been moving forward, but they're ready to rock and roll in a lot of ways. They've offered a funding opportunity to the Pittsburgh Business Group on health to look at the benefit offerings that are available to the largest employers in the Pittsburgh and Allegheny County region to help support new moms in the workforce. And while paid family leave is a little bit far afield of direct child care and early childhood education, it is also very interconnected because we know those first 1,000 days are so critical to have really deep connections made between parents and their very young children. And so they're collectively looking at how their benefits impact the ability for parents to be at home with their children and also have the opportunity to have that warm handoff into more stable childcare when the parents are ready to return to the workforce. So that's one initiative that's happening around that collective table. There's also a lot of alignment across the philanthropic community, and they're looking most specifically around compensation and wage structure strategies for child care programs. I know that's a very, very hot topic, as it should be, across the country and here in Philadelphia. So for those of you that would want to be connected to that table, I'm very happy to make those connections because there may be really key alliances that could happen across Pennsylvania. And I'm really thinking that we have a new administration coming in January, bringing a collective energy in terms of what might be able to happen at the state level and leveraging those partnerships.
Well, and Suzanne, you're also working with a national platform. Any good examples that you've seen around the country?
Oh my gosh, there's an abundance of them. I've been really surprised at how clever policymakers have been with the ARPA pandemic relief funding that was given over to the early childhood community and to policymakers. So the one that stands out in my mind that I think would be of most interest to this room is something called the Michigan Tri-Share that was created by Governor Whitmer's administration right before the pandemic. It was about a year before the pandemic. And what it is, it's literally in the name. It's a tri-share of the cost of childcare. And it's a complete tri-share between employers, the state, and then families. And the state has used this as an opportunity to leverage for HR departments to look at it as a benefit to attract new employees to the given employers that are participating in the program. So they've worked on a group of resources to work most especially with the manufacturing industries in Michigan as a way to build workforce strength. And it's expanded with the use of ARPA funds. So they've actually pushed it into more regions in Michigan. And I know the governor is really gung-ho on it and looking to use it as a demonstration project as they move forward with a new term. So that's had great success in Michigan.
And for those of you, I know we all tend to speak in acronyms. ARPA is the American Rescue Plan dollars. So just so everybody understands that. And you know, even Pennsylvania has some leftover dollars in ARPA funding, as well as counties and even municipalities. So as we start thinking creatively, that's an opportunity that we may want to be looking at in some different ways. And I'm sure the governor-elect will likely be having discussions with his fellow Democratic governors as he's out there. I'm going to turn to Rashonda. I've known Rashonda for a while. Was working at the William Penn Foundation when we were starting the pre-K for PA. So she was overlooking our grant applications and all of those sort of things, but more importantly, being a really great partner. You've been involved in the Philadelphia area philanthropic community for a long time now at Vanguard. And talk to us a little bit about those kind of regional and state collaborations, but more importantly, talk about Vanguard's commitment to early childhood and where that came from, where it's going, all of those sort of things.
Sure. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
Oh, let me turn on my mic. Yeah. So thank you, Steve. So I am Rashonda Perryman, and I lead the Strong Start for Kids, which is the philanthropic work of Vanguard, which is all around early childhood education. As Steve said, before I came to Vanguard, I was at the William Penn Foundation. Vanguard has, like many corporations, Vanguard has long been a funder, right? Or a supporter of community in a lot of ways. My opinion is that, and a lot of us believe, right? Like if we're a business in community, we should be adding and giving back to community. Lots of corporations do that, and Vanguard has done it for a long time. About 6 years ago, Vanguard leaders decided they really wanted to try to target dollars that are being raised internally to have impact in community. Senior managers went on a quest to try to find what's the right issue and landed on childhood education. It might seem like a stretch, but actually, if you know anything about Vanguard, you know that the fundamental principle of investment really is get in early so you can see payoff later, right? And obviously, we believe that in early childhood, right? That aligns really, really closely with all of the data that we have on the table around early childhood education. Obviously, if you get young children, particularly those kids, we've heard you talk about it, Sloan, lots of us know that, right? Those kids who are have these opportunities for high quality learning early on in their life. When you compare low-income children to their peers, they just do better across all kinds of dimensions in life. And we've sort of taken that up over at Vanguard. And when I think about our portfolio, there's two things that come to mind. One is leverage. The data is really clear around private dollars toward early childhood. And I'm just going to talk about early childhood. Childcare is a piece of that. But less than 2% of private dollars really have any impact, right? Like that's the stretch of private dollars. So for us at Vanguard, it's really about our dollars being used to catalyze, to really push it further, to leverage, to be a spark. So we take that really, really seriously. And then the second thing I would say, and I'm so happy to sort of see the conversation that's happening today, I would say the other thing that our Strong Start portfolio at Vanguard really takes seriously is the idea that solutions exist in community and that we can help to lift those solutions. So really being active, sitting at tables. Janet Haas isn't here, but I have to tell this story that when I applied for my job at William Penn Foundation, I had done a number of interviews, and the last interview I had to sit with Janet and have a conversation with her. Well, I didn't have childcare, and my daughter was 1.5 years. I've been at home. My husband and I we were transplants, so we just didn't have childcare. We worked it out the other couple of interviews. We just could not work at the last one. And I remember calling and just saying like, oh my God, I've had a great set of interviews, but I don't know if I can take this or go the next step because I don't have anybody to keep my child. And right away, Janet and her team just sort of said, bring her. We'll take care of it. It's a 10-minute conversation. Bring her some books. She'll run around the hall. You talk to Janet so that we can solution in this moment for you in childcare. And I just throw that out there because it's important that we recognize that women have been solving for childcare forever. We've been figuring out ways to do this. And we saw this come up in the pandemic with these sort of educational pods. We've seen family childcare solve for this. We've seen co-ops. So say all that to say that at Vanguard, we take seriously this notion that solutions exist in community, and we try to sit in community around it.
So I loved hearing how you describe Vanguard's approach. We have a portfolio. We're investing for the long term. We're trying to leverage dollars. It's a real business approach. But the other thing you focus on is inequity. Yeah. And talk to us about how you embed equity in the work that you're doing with the Caring for Children, the Strong Starts program.
Yeah, so there were a couple of things we just had to come to terms with early on in the portfolio. And one of them was just that there is just inherent bias in funding, that some people have access to funders and some don't. And the question we had to really grapple with, and I, applaud sort of our board at Vanguard for just not being afraid of saying, we need every voice at the table to have a good conversation. And I think part of that was because the business case for that had already been made. At Vanguard, and I know in lots of corporations, the idea that multiple voices come to the table to solve problems, that was just made. So when we made the case that we need to lift voice in community, it just wasn't a leap. So that was the first thing. So we had to think about funding in a very different way and who we were giving dollars to. And I think the other thing is that we had to come to terms with the fact that racial disparities aren't solved with race-neutral policies and procedures, right? Like you got to get at where those things lie. So if we know that, more Black boys, and I know Maya's going to dig into this. He's doing great work, so I'm not going to go. I don't even have to, the champ is here. But like if we know more Black boys, young Black boys are prone to suspension and expulsion, then something that's a race-neutral policy there won't get at it. We got to get at why Black boys are prone to that. And we've tried to really sort of adjust for that in our portfolio. The other thing I'll say, and then I'm going to stop, I did a site visit once at a really great childcare provider, and she happened to be a Muslim woman, and she had just gotten her licensing. And I don't know anything about licensing or, the fact that she was a Muslim provider, but she didn't have a lot of pictures of the children. She was a Muslim provider with lots of Muslim children. She didn't have a lot of pictures, and she was dinged in her licensing. And Amanda, you can tell me whether or not this is like on track. Probably not now, but she was dinged in her licensing because early childhood would say the children need to see their faces. Well, she was contesting that as a religious, her religion, they did not take pictures of children, but the system dinged her for not having pictures of children. Now, as a response to that, she figured out how to work around it. She knew she would get dinged here, so she would but it was, again, a good eye opener to me around equity and how the system is entrenched there and how our dollars at Vanguard could really be used to, one, advocate for equitable practices, but also make sure that, again, those voices are heard because I don't think those things are on purpose. It's a mismatch between whose voices are at the table and who's then making policies and procedures.
And if you're going to be community first,
right.
if you're going to be present in the community, you've got to recognize that the systems have to be flexible.
That's right. To meet the needs of all.
The needs of all, and also community mores and how that works.
That's right.
We're gonna turn to children first, and I learned a lot about legislative advocacy from Donna Cooper over years. But when we think of systems change, many of us, and rightly so, really think about the legislative advocacy. We heard Tom talk about the work that's been done by ELIC over time, and a lot of that's happening at the state and the federal level. Some of us, as members of ELIC, can't do direct lobbying. Our whether it's our business or the nature of what we're doing, we have guardrails on that. However, advocacy can take many forms and happen at many levels. And we learned a lot of that from the William Penn Foundation. We had the Alliance for Justice that we used to have.
Sorry about this.
Yeah, we went through so many trainings on what we could say and what we couldn't say. Let's talk about that current legislative landscape and where we need to focus our efforts.
Great, my mic is working. I am happy to be here as a staff person for Children First, but also a representative of our statewide coalitions, Pre-K for PA, which many of you are familiar with, but also Start Strong, which is our 0 to 3 childcare advocacy campaign, is a little bit newer. And when we look at the legislative landscape, I will say that we don't have to talk about who won and who lost. We know for a fact that there is turnover in both the House and the Senate. In just the 5 Southeast counties, we have 15 newly elected officials. Some of them were already in the House and moving to the Senate, but some of them are new. So we have some work cut out for us. We have a lot of education to do. And one way that business leaders can advocate is to talk about the brain science of early child education. And we take that for granted in this room because there's just a wealth of knowledge here, but there are a lot of newly elected officials who don't, quote unquote, get it yet. And that just is a pretty straightforward conversation about how the first 5 years of a child's life are the most critical years of development, how there are long-term dividends that pay off to society and the individual. Those are pretty simple, straightforward conversations that all of us can do, whether it be as a private citizen or as a business leader. And if you partner with ELIC, if you partner with Start Strong and Pre-K for PA, we can arm you with the research that you need to have those conversations. I will say that, we just did a study in partnership with UNC Chapel Hill that talked about the Pre-K Counts program specifically and how it had positive results at 3rd grade as a result of kids who participate in Pre-K Counts. So that's just one study that you could cite in conversations with lawmakers. So how do you go about getting to that point where you're having that conversation, right? And I said, first, partnering with some of the great advocacy organizations in this room, but also thinking about kind of the lighter touch ways in which you can advocate. So one thing that we did partnering with Alex at the Chamber was a survey of businesses in the state of Pennsylvania about the impact of the lack of non-traditional hour childcare on industries that have workers doing shift work. And that was a survey that went out. It was results were kept anonymous. People didn't have to talk specifically about individual employees and their situations, but they could talk broadly about trends that they were seeing in their communities. And that went into a report that we now share with lawmakers to talk about the need for investing in non-traditional hour childcare. And we learned so much through that report. We learned that for some employers, on-site childcare doesn't make sense, especially in rural communities, in manufacturing settings. People want their kids at home when they're working the 2nd shift or the 3rd shift. And in that way, we can start thinking about policy solutions to that, right? We can talk about relative care. People don't know that you can get childcare subsidies and have someone in your family take care of your kid. And that's relatively unknown. And so we learned that through this study. And businesses can participate in surveys like that. We're constantly doing surveys, I feel like. Another way is to a step up from in advocacy is to co-author an op-ed. And we help you write the op-ed. You don't have to write it by yourself, but sometimes a business name on an op-ed is highly influential, especially if a lawmaker is reading it. And that op-ed can, again, be about the brain science. It can be about the impact on businesses. It can be about turnover and recruitment of talent, a number of issues that are really important to the business community. And then finally, if you are so inclined, we are constantly having events with lawmakers where we educate them about what's going on in the community. So one thing we did recently was a roundtable discussion in Montgomery County about the role of childcare in the economic recovery of that community. And we had Congresswoman Madeline Dean there. We had Representative Matt Bradford, Chair of Appropriations. We had Senator Capoletti. We had Einstein Hospital there talking about the difficulties recruiting certain particular staff persons. They talked about how the salaries are high enough so staff weren't eligible for subsidy, but low enough that childcare costs were a real burden for those particular staff persons. And we talked about possible solutions. And so we welcome business voices at tables like that, where we can, possibly really start thinking about policy solutions, but also get news coverage of the issue so that we're educating the public in addition to lawmakers. And so those are all the different ways in which you can participate. I could probably talk forever about the ways in which you can advocate alongside us without worrying about appropriations and legislation and all that stuff that is a little bit scary when you start talking about lobbying. But education is really where it starts.
And as someone who's done that on numerous occasions, whether it's ELIC prepping or pre-K for PA or early learning PA or others, they provide you the materials, they provide you the talking points, they allow you to do your job, which is being a representative of the business community, of being someone who may have authority in another world. I mean, all of us at ELIC learned at the feet of Jack Brennan from Vanguard, who really taught all of us how to go into a legislator's office and talk without lobbying, because he had rules as to what he could say and what he could do. But the other place we have to advocate is sometimes within our business. And Andrea shared the toolkit. How do you see opportunities for information like that within your own business?
Sure. So I think that some of the resources in the toolkit are so valuable when you talk about giving lists of childcare programs that are already in the community. When you talk about partnering with local childcare programs, there are ways in which you can do it that would really lift up quality as something that is important. And so one way you could do it is you don't have to create an on-site childcare program from scratch. You can partner with existing childcare programs that are Star 3 and 4, which means they are highly rated as high quality. So I know that Abington Jefferson Hospital has a partnership with Play and Learn. They are a Star 4 program, and you don't have to start it from scratch. You can partner with those programs. Another way is if you offer subsidy or vouchers to your staff as an HR benefit, you could offer a little bit more for parents who choose high quality programs, because we know that it costs more to run a high quality program. Tuition is a little bit higher, and it makes for parents making that decision is really hard, especially when you think about how expensive it can get. So those are some of the ways, think about lifting up the programs that have put in the effort to become high quality, partnering with those programs and thinking about your HR benefits. And so when you give that list, for example, denoting which programs are Star 3 and Star 4 is really helpful for parents so they can navigate and make those decisions.
Thanks. Yes, please.
Yeah, so I just want to underline that completely. I've worked in a number of different states and am always shocked at the rich tapestry of high quality, high impact early childhood, both organizations, nonprofits that are sort of leading the way, acting as umbrellas, and the providers of care. I often say that I'd worked in Dallas. I'm from Dallas originally. I worked in Atlanta. I worked in Chicago, in DC, in public policy. And I remember coming here and I think it was Mary Graham, Mary's over there, and just being blown away that we had this sort of richness that existed within the early childhood sector. So I just encourage folks who are representing corporations and businesses that, to your point, Steve, you don't have to do it alone. We often are looking for sort of these organizations, like, I don't have to tell my anything, right? Like, my tells me, like, we're going to do this, 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 and this, because we have just such a rich group of organizations that's doing the work. You don't have to build it. It's here. It already exists in the Southeast.
Well, and it's a diversity even statewide. I mean, we have folks from the military, we have folks from law enforcement, we have business, we have advocates. It's a real rich, which also gives you a variety of different arguments when you go in to do that education. You can talk about it from military preparedness. You can talk about it from law enforcement. I mean, we've got police chiefs. I don't know how many events I've shown up at with police chiefs as a way of really thinking about this. And, you know, and that's something I get a benefit as a member of ELIC. And, you know, we get to see that statewide and regional effort. One of the things in your packets and at your tables, Andrea mentioned it earlier, the case study of what's gone on in York, where a group of business leaders over a long period of time, and we've been fortunate. We've had lots of legislative and even governors who were a part of those efforts, and they've gotten their, in some ways, education through a legacy of time over a long period of time of the York community working together. I take a look at that. That's really worth looking at. But I'm going to go rapid fire. We'll start with Rashonda. We'll go to Suzanne and then to Mai. Give me an example of a kind of a regional effort or others that you would lift up as a model, and something, where do you see the greatest opportunity for businesses to make an impact? Maybe more importantly, talk about where you see the opportunity for businesses to make an impact.
I think collaboration, sitting at tables and really thinking about what's on the ground. So the first thing I think about is the Fund for Quality that was started at the William Penn Foundation, but over time has really sort of brought in other funders and really thought broader. Reinvestment Fund is a part of it, but it really is about, like, how can we collaborate to get enough money out into the community so that we can stretch and expand dollars. And during the pandemic, we saw that model being able to be activated in the moment.
Quickly. Suzanne.
I've seen a lot of examples, both in Pennsylvania and around the country, focused between the business community and philanthropic and policymakers around wages for early childhood educators. Yeah. And it seems a little far-flung because I know it's a little bit disconnected because it's very policy focused. But what I've noticed is that the greatest efforts that have had the most success in this space are when the business community is able to broaden that table and really bring economic development experts conversation, and that really can switch a lot of light bulbs for policymakers to be able to understand why wages are so critical to the foundation of ensuring quality happens in their community. And I can share a lot of examples, but I think if this room can reach for its North Star and think about what issue area it wants to focus on, pressing for wages, it takes a lot of commitment. It is a little bit of a slow drip. It takes a long time to get there, but I can say that this room has the ability to have huge impact on an area within early childhood that is so desperately needed to have a lot of agency and to have a lot of energy around it.
Well, and we all know retention of employees is so important, and how many of us who may have had the opportunity to have in a class with an experienced teacher, someone who really knows the science, knows how to teach, makes a huge difference over the long term. Mai, you get the last word.
All right. I'm going to cheat and give two answers.
You've learned well from Donna.
I want to share that we do have a wage study coming out in the next month. In fact, in partnership with Reinvestment Fund and the Start Strong campaign, that is going to be about what early childhood educators are making in the state. We were able to partner with OCTEL, the Office of Child Development and Early Learning, and Department of Labor and Industry. So we were able to match data from the Professional Registry of Early Childhood Educators with actual wage data that is collected for unemployment purposes. So that gives us real-time information about what they're getting paid. We also did a survey of 3,800 early childhood educators, and I'll give you some preview. 50% of them said they intend to leave in 5 years. So we really need to think about what we can do between now and that 5 years so that we can stop that from happening. The other thing I want to lift up long-term advocacy is that we just finished a really great childcare voter campaign this past election, and there were great opportunities for business leaders to be a part of nonpartisan, both aisles, their conversations about the importance of early learning, lifting up early learning as an election issue that candidates on both sides of the aisle need to pay attention to. And I know that you were a part of some of those conversations, but 2024 is going to be here before we know it. And we intend fully to do this again so that we can really make it a campaign issue, that if you're going to run for office, you better have an opinion about early child education because voters are going to pay attention.
And I'm going to give you a suggestion, which is don't ignore the county commissioners races next year.
Absolutely.
They have leftover ARPA money. They have some other, and thinking about it as, their jobs are human services or economic development. And those are great opportunities. All right, I think I've hit my time mark, and so now it's time for Q&A. I didn't even get the sign put up until I said it was time. So any questions for this panel? You've got some great experts here. Yes.
Bob Borenstein, Apple Child Care Center. I'll address this to the conversation that I might have as a child care owner and with a local large employer calling the HR director, and how that introduction would initially go to get an appointment, and talk about benefits to their employees, creating a voucher system.
So so I understand, you're a childcare provider and you want to have conversations with businesses in your community about partnerships, right? Yeah, large employers. I think that there's some great examples in this room of businesses that have started to form those partnerships. So I think today is a great example of connecting with those employers. I think Start Strong and Pre-K for PA can connect you with businesses that have already been a part of our advocacy campaign. So they're already educated about the importance of early child education. And I think that, being a part of our advocacy, coming to Harrisburg with us, having conversations with your local elected officials, so that businesses see that you are a really important partner to work with. I think that's a great place.
I'll build on one thing with that, and talk to Andrea, talk to other folks who are a part of the business community involvement in early childhood. Find one of them and take them with you. Find an ELIC member, find somebody who can help make the case as to why it was important to their business to be a part of it. And once you find one, bring them along for the next one, and bring them along for the next one, because they'll be the strongest advocate for it. Yes, please.
Sorry, my question probably small. My view is just only in Philadelphia, and I work here. We're talking a lot about quality of education for kids. It's unfortunately to see that some growing family, let's say at my age, starting to have kids, tend to want to move outside the city a little bit just for better education, and they have to choose between job growing, business thriving, or better education for their kids. And when we talk about quality, not just inside the door, right? It's also include the quality of life of children, walking to school, going to school. And I see a lot in North Philly or South Philly that the kids going to childcare or daycare, when they walk out, they have to walk past homeless people, past people who overdoses and things like that. So how can we look into that aspect in terms of not just the education of the program, 4-star, 3-star, but the quality of life of that children, and also the family that wanted to thrive and grow business in Philadelphia, also want a better education for their kids?
You want to take that?
I can start.
You guys do broad work as well, so yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I'm most proud of around the early childhood sector is how we've expanded what quality means, and moving from sort of the static way of thinking about these are the, the checkoffs or the sets of things that mean quality, to a broader way of thinking, to exactly your point, right? Families make choices based on their own experiences. What I might think is good for me and my family might be very different from what the sort of dominant way of thinking might be. And I think that this is relatively recent. I mean, I've been in early childhood my entire career, and only recently have we began to push against sort of this notion that all families should fit into the same box of what is right for their kids. So you see that sort of pushing out in a lot of different ways. A lot of childcare centers you go to now, you are having these really broad conversations with providers around what does it mean for me as a parent? And I'm saying this as a parent with young children. How do I relate? How can I come here and feel comfortable, right? Like maybe I choose for my kids to be in my local religious institution. Maybe I choose for my child to be at my local school district. Maybe I choose for my child. But I think as the system grows, we're beginning to see all of those pieces as a point in which families can find quality for their kids and building that out along the way.
Mai, do you want to add, or Mai or Suzanne, do you want to add anything to that?
I would just put a plug in for our home-based and relative providers. They know their communities inside and out. They are deeply underfunded and unsupported. The system right now is just not built for them. And so if there are ways to leverage the capacity building and expertise in this room to shine a light on the needs of those providers in particular, they literally know everyone on their block. They know everyone in their neighborhood. They know their families inside and out and their entire family economic security needs. And that is a wealth of knowledge that can inform local policies that can strengthen neighborhood quality of life aspects, as you termed it. So I think that finding those leaders that right now don't see themselves as leaders in those very localized spaces, and I really hear what Rashawn is saying, it really must be a community focused and come from within the community solution. I think there is a great advantage that Philadelphia has in having so many home-based providers, because unfortunately they are somewhat of a fading piece of the system in a lot of regions across Pennsylvania.
Mai, do you want to add?
Yeah, so for those who are not familiar with Children First, we do advocacy on a number of topic areas. In addition to early child education, we do K-12 public education, we do public health, we do juvenile justice and vulnerable youth. And so this is just a plug for working with us on a number of issues as business leaders. We have plenty of opportunities for advocacy. But I also want to say that advocacy can be a long road, right? Tom was talking about how we have worked really hard for a long time with Pre-K for PA to build the intellectual mobilization and capacity in Harrisburg to make those investments. We're working really hard every day to shine a light on the 0 to 3 space. But every day, parents have to make choices about where to send their kid. They have to make choices about whether or not they pay for a Star 3 program or they put more food on the table. Like, those are really hard decisions. And I think that's where business leaders can really step in. If you can provide a small subsidy for your families, if you can help them find quality but affordable childcare, that translates into decisions that can really increase or improve the quality of life of families in your communities and make it easier for them to choose to stay in Philadelphia.
We have time for Tom. Last question.
Because it's part of the last two panels, the need for communicating people in Harrisburg never ending. I forget the statistic, but it's something overwhelming. Well over 50% of our legislation in Harrisburg now is in there less than 2 years. And we started all of this, way back. So when someone mentioned earlier, there's 50 new legislators just from the Philly area. That number is over 60 statewide. So that is a continuing thing we can't take for granted. That they remember those longitudinal studies. We still have to do that kind of communication, which is not technically lobbying. And lastly, to underline Steve's point about county commissioners, there is still a lot of money there. And having those kind of conversations is really important.
When you see the difference that can be made even at a local level here in Philadelphia with the Philly Pre-K initiative and what happened at a local level and started that. So yeah, Tom, that's a great ending point for the systems change focus here. I think we all have our charge in terms of everyone can be an advocate in a variety of different ways. And advocacy does not mean lobbying, and it does not mean having to go out and twist somebody's arm. This is about education. This is about knowledge. This is about working both within your own systems and your own business, but also with the systems that are outside. Thanks to the panel. If we can give a round of applause. Turn it back over to Sloan. We'll figure out how to get off the chair.
I know they're a little high. Thank you again just for that great panel discussion. I'm really excited. So we're going to transition to our next panel, and then we'll have lunch. So bear with us. But I'm very, very excited to welcome Mary Graham, who will be our moderator. She's the executive director at Children's Village, which is a center literally across the street. So I'm really happy to have you here. Amanda Atkinson, who's the managing director of Child Development and Family Services at PHMC. Adrian Briggs, who's the director of Little Bits Family Childcare Home, Naima Suluki, who's the director of Naima Suluki Family Childcare Home, and Jacob Roche, who is a research associate at Reinvestment Fund. We're really excited to have just this discussion on generating collaborative opportunities. And so thank you all for being here. I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Mary, to get us started.
Well, first of all, thank you for holding this gathering. It's so exciting that it's happening. And somebody talked about re-educating people and remembering that people don't always get it. We started 46 years ago across the street, and it was a childcare center not set up by a community-based organization to meet the needs of children, but rather by an economic development group to support the working families in the unionized garment industry. So it was always, though, a partnership between the private sector, the public sector. It was always a center that was dealing with a child in the context of a family, in the context of a community, and that community includes the business organizations. So it's really exciting that these conversations are happening, and there's been so much data and so many points made. I know one of the questions was, in the transportation industry, are we thinking about the origin or the destination? In childcare, we think about the same thing. Our destination is educated adults that start out as young children. So you have employees in your businesses. So it's a really important conversation. And I just want to introduce, we have a number of people here, Adrian and good friends. So I'm going to start with Adrian and Nay. Given your roles as childcare providers.
Hi, I'm Adrian Briggs. I'm a family childcare provider. Been in business 30 years.
That's a while. Yeah. Yeah. So could you talk about the perspectives of all the inequities that exist already? And one of the conversations that we're having today is we need some systemic changes. And how are we dealing with these systemic changes? It's not going to be, one switch that takes it. It's going to be many different things. So why don't you and Nay talk about what you already know to be some of the inequities that exist?
Do you really want to go there?
Well, no, you only have a couple minutes, Adrian.
Okay, so this is a hot topic. One of the biggest inequities is our rates. Okay, I've been in business 30 years, run a high quality program, fully pre-K, master's degree in early childhood education, income $35,000 a year. How inequitable is that? How disrespectful is that? How many people in this room have a master's degree in their profession making $35,000 a year?
Well, that says it.
Well, I'm Nay. I know Andrea very well.
we're usually selected to be in these type of forums often because we are leaders in the field. And again, thank everyone for being here, and thank the panel as well, and thank everyone at the Federal Reserve Bank for inviting us. I believe that this is an opportunity, maybe after the pandemic, things have happened in the workplace. Again, I'm master's degree, 30 shy of PhD, hopefully soon. So I think Andrea and I share that because I believe that some people and some people who make policies do not understand that a lot of people in the field of education are educated. We are educated providers. And that, I mean, she spoke a little bit about the disparity in wage, and I would like to just elaborate on that a little bit and speak a little bit about the disparity in people that we hire in our staffing and disparities in families that we service. Some of the disparities that we encounter as family providers and as providers in the field is that a lot of, if we're only making as business owners $35,000, imagine what our staff is making. And these are staff members who have families and may be single women. These are staff members who may be women of color. So if we're making 35, what are we paying them? Obviously, we're paying them less. And we want educated people in the field of education. But how can we hire educated teachers to teach our children to be a part of the labor force when we cannot even offer them a living wage? A lot of educators in early childhood are below, me, myself, I have 2 children. I'm below the poverty line, and I have a child in private school and a child in college. So as providers, sometimes we have to work multiple jobs. We have to be multiple business owners. And then just to elaborate, when I think about my parents as people in the workforce, a lot of times it's a disconnect with parents and with the people they work for, because I'm a small provider, so I do offer non-traditional hours for parents who may be nurses or doctors, parents who may be lawyers, parents who have to work on the weekend. So we do offer non-traditional hours, but it's difficult to get staff who want to work non-traditional hours because, again, who's going to take care of their children because we're only paying them a low wage. But getting back to the parents that we service, some of the parents that we service who work non-traditional hours run into many inequities in daycare. One inequity that I find for women and women of color who may be have single income or single households, a lot of times they want to come to us as non-traditional providers, but sometimes, even though we're offering non-traditional hours, they still have a barrier. I believe someone in the back said, who's going to walk the child to school? Who's going to pick the child up? Because daycare, if you're getting public assistance, sometimes it's only 8 hours. So if you do get the 8 hours, and say if you're working a 10-hour shift, you have to pay out of your pocket the additional 2 hours. Or we run into barriers where we have families who just met the deadline and did not qualify for early child care funds. So if they make a little bit over, then they have to pay out of pocket. So in addition to your regular rent, gas, and food, you still have to pay for child care. So it's just multiple inequities, which you guys are all aware of. And if we could just partner and continue to advocate, not only for business owners, but also parents and also teachers, because teachers, I'm a licensed teacher, but I decided to be a business owner because of my own relationship with my own children. So I got paid more as a teacher than I'm getting paid as a daycare owner. But my passion and my advocacy is for young children. So that's where my heart lies. So that's why I'm here.
And that's a really important point. Suzanne Marsh said earlier, we cannot forget the family providers. They're part of the solution because even the best centers, I remember ISI Caring Center, they were going to have 24 hours and it didn't work because parents don't necessarily want to bring their children to their work site for a second and third shift. We're talking about choices, and those choices are important. And we're talking about the inequities of, how we support families and children. One of the questions earlier was about the benefits and the benefits cliff. Today, I was greeted with a resignation letter from a staff person who is, as a classroom aide, very interested in working in this field. She's from the Indonesian community. We recruited her. We're sending her to school. We're paying her a decent wage. So guess what? She doesn't qualify for subsidy. So she can't afford even the discounted rate at our center. She knows that I can't give away care because one of the other things I do is teach business classes because it is a business. In order to survive, we have to know where the funding come from. So here's a solution, Kentucky. If you work in the childcare industry, you get subsidy, even if you are making a decent wage, because you're not getting rich. You just might make over the poverty guideline. When I say our staff are getting $60,000 a year as master level teachers, people are like, wow. I'm like, yeah, they can go to the public school and make 90. So don't say, wow, just say, well, they're getting closer. So there's lots of suggestions and solutions, and that's what we want to talk about. So I'm going to ask now, I'm going to turn it over to Jacob and Amanda. You both come from organizations that have other things that are happening and do other things from PHMC and the TRF. I'm so used to calling it the reinvestment fund, but TRF. So why don't you talk about how your organizations have been investing in childcare and why? I'm glad you do. I think it's great. When I first met Sarah from the reinvestment fund, I'm like, why are they calling us? You know, they're across the street, but why are they calling us? And it was like, oh, they know how to do these time studies and all these other things. So why don't you talk? So I'll turn it over to Amanda and then.
Okay, I'll go first.
You'll go first.
All right. I'm Amanda Atkinson. I'm the Managing Director of Child Development and Family Services at PHMC. So PHMC we're a public health institute. We're based here in Philadelphia and do work within the state, within the region, and nationally. The group that I oversee is about 30 different initiatives that are really targeted at supporting the health and well-being of children and their families, working from prenatal to the point in time when those youth are entering the workforce. And we, I think, have a very kind of multifaceted approach to solving a core problem, which is, how do we generate value for families? How do we meet the needs that families express and communicate? And we, operate as an intermediary for very large public initiatives, PHL Pre-K, the OST network, prevention work, our local PDO, our professional development organization for early childhood educators. And we really use those large-scale initiatives to help define where there are gaps, where there are opportunities for new intersections and new initiatives, really in public welfare, education, and health, trying to understand, I think, in new ways, how to approach this complex problem without trying to simplify it. Because families have to create complex solutions. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Adrian and Nay's commentary is how much they highlight the nuances that operators have in understanding families' needs. And our policies need to align with that level of nuance. I think it's exciting to be in this work right now. Rashonda noted that we are addressing our definition of quality. And I think one of the most important things that we can be doing is aligning that definition of quality with family definition of quality and family's definition of what is valuable. So I can pause there. But.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go next. So I'm Jacob Roche. I'm a researcher with the Reinvestment Fund. We're a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution based here in Philadelphia. I like to describe us as a lender with a public purpose. So, in that role, we've been working in the childcare sector for a number of years. All of our work in childcare, part of it is about supporting kids and families and creating, great educational institutions. But a big part of the work is also about, supporting small businesses, small business owners and entrepreneurs who are running and operating these centers. So, a big pillar of all of our ECE work, whether it's, grant making or loans, is about helping business providers, childcare providers understand, and improve the elements of their business that they need to focus on to make their business more sustainable or to grow it. So whether that's, a technical assistance grant, to help provider, hire the professional help they need to plan a facilities expansion through our Fund for Quality, or like a low cost, working capital loan to address kind of business challenges or growth challenges that EC providers are having. That's really an important perspective for all of our work in EC. The second pillar of our work is really about using data and research to target our resources. Because, we recognize, as many have said, the challenge is so big and the resources we have are really just a drop in the bucket. So, an important consideration for us is how do we make sure our investments are complementing others, attracting other investments, and not displacing them. So about 10 years ago, we partnered with the William Penn Foundation to study the supply and demand for childcare. And the result of that partnership was a tool we call Childcare Map, childcaremap.org, if you want to go. I don't have a slide showing, but it's a tool that shows us, within Philadelphia, identifies high priority areas where there are large shortages of childcare. And, that's data that we use internally. We update that analysis every year, but also something we make available to others. So if you go to childcaremap.org, you can use that tool. You can generate custom reports. And, we're really proud that other people in the community, providers, other community groups, and the city itself are also looking at that data and using it to help them, inform grant applications or their own programmatic activity. And we've replicated that in a number of other cities as well. But that map and that data is really foundational for how we have approached this sector. And it also spurred us to think about some of the other challenges that, prevent access from not just where sites are located.
That's important. Again, it brings up the issue of choice. And, somebody earlier mentioned Philly Pre-K, and that was a great advocacy effort. There was no lobbying involved, all advocacy. It was great to have the business community with us, and it was very successful. And we applied, and we were denied slots because it was it was seen as a neighborhood support. Well, my neighbor is you, Federal Reserve. People you might think you live here, but you don't. So there's not a lot of housing down here, but we have a lot of families who choose to send their children to us for different reasons. A lot of it has to do with supporting families. Over the years, the center, working with the garment industry, was always the newest immigrant. So we had the Cuban refugees, and we had the Haitian community, and then we have the Asian community. Well, the garment industry left. The people didn't leave, but the garment industry left. We continue working with businesses and supporting families, and quality means looking at the values and support that the families need, and everybody's different. So it took a little bit of educating our city council folks to say, some families choose pre-K where they work area. So it's a long battle. And Jacob, you talked about the childcare deserts. Childcare should be everywhere because that's where families are. And it's not possible to have a large center in rural Lancaster, but it is possible to support a network of high quality family centers. A long time ago, large agencies like Federation, Childcare, and Associated Daycare, and Diversified supported family providers because it's a business. And as you know, I've worked with Adrian. She's, even when we're doing classes at night, she's still working, prepping the meals and stuff. Well, these larger agencies used to support the family providers with CACFP reimbursements and all the paperwork. Adrian's got Philly Pre-K. She now has a lot of paperwork to go with Philly Pre-K. Mm-hmm. It doesn't amount to all the funding, but the funding doesn't amount to all the paperwork that's included, but you grab at it. So we want to talk about the relationship that is missing here, which is the employer. So, Nay, can you talk about what's happening with the implications at your program? You're talking about working with the families, but you said the employer's missing. The employer's perspective is missing.
Yeah.
So they don't understand that you don't meet on these regular basis.
Yeah. So a lot of barriers that I hear and we hear in early childhood educations from our families that we service. And even though we're offering non-traditional hours, I think I talked a little bit about this earlier, but some of our families in the workplace still face multiple layers of barriers in early childhood education, which is it's a big disparity because it affects women and women of color more so than men. Because I mean, it's really unfair to say, but technically, a lot of women are the ones that are taking the children to daycare, and they're also the ones who still have to go to work, and they're also the ones who have to come home and deal with the children and interact with them. So just to continue to elaborate on some of those disparities in the workplace is the employer is, I would just say, unaware of all of the challenges that maybe a single woman of color has to face in early childhood education. And one thing as business owners that we face a lot of times is with the pandemic, we faced a lot of issues with children being sick and families being sick. And we have strict policies across daycares for strictness. One is a license requirement. So in order for us to keep our license, we have to follow the policies, right? So two, it's our own inner policies with daycare that we have to follow in terms of strictness, in terms of illness. And a lot of us faced it more so in the pandemic, what's affected. I know for me, my parents. For example, if a parent has a very difficult time with PTO time at work. So if you have limited PTO time at work, which you may apply for, one, vacation. Two, you may apply it for your own sickness. Three, what if you have a family member that's ill that you have to take care of? And what if you have multiple children? Mm-hmm. So say if you used all your PTO time or you had additional days at work, then you as a mom or as a dad have to make a decision to say, how do I tell my employer that I have to take off for my child? That is not looked at good in the workplace because your employer does not want to hear that you can't come to work because your child is sick. And your daycare provider does not want to hear, I have to bring my child to daycare because I have to go to work. I don't have any more PTO days, or I may get in trouble at work. It's kind of like a fear factor in terms of parents, because I'm not going to say that all businesses are like this, but as a business owner, I do encourage my families to communicate with your employers and say, hey, I'm a parent or I'm a new parent, and really express to them that my daycare does not allow my child to come in sick. And I want to have that conversation early on with human resources, because maybe I can have that conversation and we can just build a relationship where, no, my child is not sick all the time. But we do have, in my daycare, we have parents who sometimes have children who do have a lot of disabilities. Because we're small, we can really cater to those type of families. And sometimes if you have a child with a disability, you may have a child who's out more sick than normal. So we do encourage to talk to your employers, but employers are not open to that. Because if you expect your employee to be at work and then they do or don't have PTO time, you don't get PTO time. There's no policy that I've ever seen. And an employer is saying, okay, you have PTO time for days off sick for your child. Yes, you get days off sick for yourself, but not for your child. So those are some of the advocacy things that we would like to see on a larger level. And this one, being able to partner with businesses, because you guys write your own human relations policy. And if we see it on a federal level, a city level, and the state level, just to respect employees in the workplace a little bit more when it comes to 6 days off, because it's a domino effect. It affects everyone, the business owner, because if a parent brings a child sick, everyone gets sick. And I mean, we cannot express that enough. And I mean, it's almost like my parents get upset with me. Oh, I can't bring my child because they're sick. No, because I'm going to get sick. And if I get sick, I can't open my business anymore. I have to close down my business. I'm not going to get paid. I can't take care of my own children. And then other children that I care for are going to get sick, and they're going to take their children somewhere else because I'm closed. So it's just a domino effect. So it's like a bigger picture when employees have to take off for sick children. And we just hope to create more advocacy around that and more partnerships so everyone understand, no, the staff member just doesn't want to stay home. Nobody wants to stay home with sick kids. Sick kids are mean. Okay? They're irritable. They want you to lay in bed with them and get sick with them. So, it's all these multiple layers. So employers, nobody wants to stay home with their sick kids, but do you want to allow a parent to bring their child sick, and then your child can be in the daycare where they may allow those policies, and then your child gets sick, and then your child comes home, and then you're sick. And then you're like, how did I get sick? Because you didn't allow your employees to take off because their kids were sick. So these are like mundane things, but they're things for all of us to like really think about because, it's so many disparities that exist, and just a little bit deeper when an employee is not allowed to take off or does not have any more PTO time. You go into your employer and say, I have to take off. You can lose your job. So it creates all these different layers. And some of our parents are afraid to come and say their child is sick. And then God forbid I find out I have to call you in the middle of the day. And you're like, I can't come. You have to come, So it's a multi-layer effect. And in terms of monies, if parents are not paid to be able to stay home with their kids and they lose wages, they lose income. We lose income too because some parents are afraid to tell us. And then sometimes if you come to my daycare and you bring your child 3 times sick, can't come anymore because I don't want to get sick. I don't want other kids to get sick. And especially with the pandemic, our rules for sickness are a little bit more stricter. So that's why I'm like overly talking about sickness, but it is a really big issue in daycare because it does affect wages and it affects us as business owners because guess what? I don't get paid.
And also, their state policies are such that if the family has subsidy, a child can only miss 40 days. And you think, oh, that's a lot of time. Not a lot of time because it's 40 days out of 260 days. And, if you have multiple children, you're not going to take your one child out who's sick to take your other child to school, or so a child may miss school because a sibling is sick. And so what happens when the state doesn't pay? They don't pay us. So I'm like, oh, so do I charge the parent who didn't make money because they didn't get paid? The same thing with, operating policies. I don't think Adrian takes off 40 days. I don't think she takes off 3 weeks or 2 weeks. And she's been doing this business for 30 years.
Yes, because all my children are subsidized. So
right.
With subsidy, I'm only allowed 15 days a year.
Right. That's the other thing. You're only...
If children
that
are 6 for 40.
Right.
And I get sick, and God forbid any holidays come, or personal life come, or maybe I have to go to a doctor's. Doctors are not open on the weekend anymore. Most of them.
It becomes problematic.
Very problematic.
The 15-day rule.
The 15-day rule, exactly.
We have the 40-day rule that is really annoying, and the 15-day rule for the providers. So if there's you talked about sick children being difficult to handle. Imagine a snowstorm. Oh. Well, I can't close. And you know who shows up during snowstorms? Infants and toddlers. People will take care of your preschooler for you. Oh, yeah. They're not taking your toddler, and they're not taking your infant. And the school-age kids are driving you crazy, so they come. So we have high attendance on snow days, except staff who can't make it. Right. So it's like, it really is a more complicated scenario than we would like. And, we're trying to come up with some solutions. And we're going to move to that part of the conversations. And we need employers to be involved. I'm glad to see employers here. The employers that you don't see here are the small businesses. Thank goodness for PNC Bank. You know why? Because without PNC Bank, Pennsylvania would not have pre-K counts. During the Rendell administration, he tried. He had 2 budget impasses. PNC shamed them, the legislators, shamed them into having pre-K funding. We were one of the last of 9 states to pass it. So we love PNC Bank. We love the large organizations. We also like the smaller businesses. We've developed relationships with the parents at our center, and oh, this person, they worked here, and turns out that child, the person that they referred to being a board member, went to our childcare center, and I remember him. So now he's on my board. I have to say, remember, I really treated you well. You're my boss now. But so we have those large organizations. Then we have other companies who see it as their philosophy, SCI, Vanguard, and others. But what about the other businesses? What is it that the other businesses can do? Well, there's things that you can do. The pre-K tax credit. Everybody knows about the EITC for school-age kids. Well, there's a little unknown one, the pre-K tax credit, that for many years went untouched. $5 million of tax credits went untouched till I heard about it, and we got some folks to do a campaign about it, and I got Becker Brothers and Novik Brothers, all our vendors to get involved, and now that money's gone into a day and a half, and an hour and a half. So we need that. So we're going to come up with some other suggestions. So Adrian and Amanda, back to you, Amanda. Can you talk about some of the ideas that PNC has done that are really helping shift the narrative? Like when you've talked about the different policies and providers, groups that you support, and the initiatives, and you support OST funding. You support it by being the financial conduit with Philly Pre-K and all those fiscal things that nobody else wants to deal with.
So I think that aside from the kind of administrative capacity and that fiscal kind of back office strength and our organizational ability to bring that those kinds of supports to the provider sector in terms of just helping to maintain cash flow, timely payment of invoicing, a lot of reliability, and in instances where the public funding might not be so reliable and stable. Aside from that, the organization really leverages our research and evaluation team and our capacity to examine both the success of the initiatives that we have in place, but also to identify who is not benefiting from these initiatives as they're currently operating. Where are we continuing to see disparities? We have had the pleasure of working with Reinvestment Fund on Fund for Quality and have achieved a lot of success in terms of helping organizations, childcare early learning organizations, become multi-site agencies, which we know helps increase their business sustainability and stability. But at the same time, we've recognized that we haven't seen what we had hoped to see in terms of high quality programs in the childcare deserts of the city. So the question becomes, well, what is it about our current policy structure? What is it about our current revenue, the way we're directing our public revenue and funding that's preventing us from reaching those individuals, those families, those businesses that don't seem to be really benefiting or benefiting most from our current approaches to the work? So, I think adding that level of analysis, and then again, I think I'm going to go back to this, the synthesis of examining how does this educational effort, this in some instances, it is, I think, defined as kind of a prevention effort and a health effort. But how is it that that's connected to these other public systems? How is it connected to larger divestment in certain areas within Philadelphia? We certainly heard, I remember, I don't know your name, but you raised the issue around inclusive practices and inclusion. We can also acknowledge that, and you raised infants and toddlers. There is segmentation within this industry that we don't necessarily handle well in our current payment and policy structure. So, I think that's a position and an approach that PHMC brings to this work and that our team hopes to bring to this work, largely by ensuring that we're employing and engaging a wide range of experts in the field. We have folks that have been classroom teachers and directors. We have folks that are clinical professionals, mental health professionals, facilities professionals. A lot of good thinking, I think, needs to go into the, again, complex solutions that are needed to really change the narrative and shift the impacts and make them more equitable in early learning.
as somebody who's benefited from Fund for Quality, there's a lot of work to do to apply for the application, the application and the paperwork. And I'm fortunate because I like numbers and budgets. And, I'm like, oh, I know what a budget is. But a lot of the childcare providers, they don't go into this field, into childcare to make money. They do it because they like their kids, or they elect to stay at home to care for the children, and it was a way to have a business. So filling out those applications is not always easy. So Jacob, I'll tell you, the first loan we got, I can tell you exactly what it was. We built our deck, and Sarah was at the cast iron building and could see our deck across the street, and we needed a loan. And I couldn't get one from the bank because, crayons don't count for a lot, neither do Legos. Our assets are our materials and our children, and you can't put them, they're priceless. So, you talked about the research that you've done. Some of the best things I've read have come from TRF, and even in experience as I've been, sometimes I get questions from TRF staff, and I'm like, I don't know what they're asking. What is it that you're asking me? Because it's a different language. So could you translate some of that into what you do?
Yes. Yeah, sure. Well, speaking of the research, about a year ago, we partnered with Vanguard and Rashonda to do kind of like a landscape analysis to understand how were businesses and childcare providers working together in the region. And, we tried to kind of catalog what all the different practices were. And I think we've kind of already talked about a lot of them, but I kind of think about it like there's sort of a spectrum of ways for, these two groups to engage together. We've talked about the importance of advocacy, right? That's really, really important. It has kind of a longer term payoff. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got businesses running their own childcare centers. That's really difficult and really hard to do. We don't see a lot of that. But I think there's a lot in the middle that is underutilized, and we really should be taking more advantage of. And I think also addresses some of the challenges we've been talking about. So one of the things I love, just another plug for the PA Toolkit, does an awesome job of laying out what all those kind of middle underutilized strategies are. And so I'm not going to get into that now, but I'll just say very quickly, addressing our work policies, just like you said, to give parents more flexibility to use the care we already have, addressing the pay that, Philadelphia workers earn is really important. But then also, the benefits providing. So we talked about the child care tax credit, dependent care expense accounts is another one. But I think where there's a lot of unrealized potential, and we haven't maybe taken advantage of everything that is available to us, is in the kinds of direct partnerships between providers and businesses that Maya was talking about, to subsidize access for workers, to get priority access for your workers, or provide vouchers. We're really lucky in the city that, unlike some of the other cities where we've done these supply and demand analyses, we don't necessarily need to add 500 new childcare programs here. We have an amazing sector, but we need to make sure is that the businesses we do have are accessible to parents in all the ways we've been talking about, that they're sustainable and that they're high quality. And so we need to take advantage of the sector we already have, and find ways to build connections. I think the comment you made, the gentleman over there made earlier about how do we get childcare providers in the same room as business leaders is a huge barrier to this. Most childcare businesses, they don't have a marketing budget or a sales staff, right? So, how do you get in front of local businesses who maybe would want to work with you? I think forums like this are really great. We need to do more work like this. But that's an area where I think there's a lot of room for innovation.
We don't even have an HR person. It's the director or the family provider, coming up with all those things. You talked about, the connection. I mean, for a long time, for almost 30 years, we never had to pay for printing. Why? Because a parent had a connection at a hospital, and the hospital had their own printers. And I'm like, I love this. And you think, oh, what's a couple $1,000s? A lot. It could make a difference, because all our resources go to staff. We don't spend a whole lot of money on, because we don't have it. So, getting families to even just advocate to their employer, hey, maybe you can help my childcare center. Are there I have people collecting scrap paper all over because kids go through a lot of paper. And, clean Xerox paper's expensive, but scrap paper, hey, and we come and pick it up. So it's things like that. So we could talk, it's us and them between lunch. We're between them and lunch. So we have 1 minute each where what's the most valuable role you see employers being about to fill in the work to advance a more sustainable system, a more sustainable childcare system and childcare to support the childcare sector. Go ahead, we'll go down the line.
Sure.
You go first. A minute.
Yeah, a minute. So I do think the toolkit is incredible. I think there's a lot of information there. I'm going to say that understanding your workforce, understanding what is meaningful and is of value to them, what it is that they're looking for, and then trying to help elevate those qualities, those attributes in policy spaces. And I think there's a lot of, willingness to listen to employers, to business owners. So, use that voice and use that access. The second piece is childcare providers are also business owners. So in addition to kind of thinking about these targeted partnerships, recognizing when childcare is not in the room, when early learning partners aren't in the room and might be really helpful and beneficial to have at the table, not as a secondary consideration, but at the foundational agenda setting stage of activities.
Like Amanda said, use your voices for when our voices are not there. Educate them on the educators that are educating the educators. So without us, we are the sector that educates everyone from the littlest on up. It starts at their foundation. So please, please, please use your voices to advocate for early childhood education.
Yeah, echoing what both of them just said, those are hugely important. I guess I would add as a sort of third component there is facilities. Facilities are huge. Paying for them, maintaining them, creating them for high quality early learning environments, it's a huge burden for childcare businesses. So if you're a business that has access to unused first floor commercial retail space with great egress, lots of people up here would love to talk with you. But anything we can do to make facilities space more accessible, more affordable, more sustainable would be huge.
Yeah, ditto to what everyone said. Listen to your employees, be open to their lifestyle because they do want to work for you. It's not that they're coming in trying to make excuses. They love their jobs, but they do have families to provide for. I would just add that, and again, expand on, really try to be the voice for the voiceless. Some of us up here, we're thankful for the Federal Reserve Bank for giving us this platform. However, a lot of us can't travel to Harrisburg or travel to Washington to partner with your senators, your state representatives, because the change actually has to happen at the top. These are great conversations, but the change has to happen with business owners who, I hate to say it, have the big dollars. And you can support, or some of the bigger childcare centers can support politicians and say, we're going to fund your campaign, but we will also like to have voices for the voiceless, for business owners in the childcare diaspora, and just, partnering with other organizations like the Reinvestment Fund, Philly Pre-K, and just continue to create those partnerships. And again, just listening and saying, okay, because at the end of the day, the childcare providers, we were all taught by a childcare provider. So we created the labor force for us to be here today. So we are creating the labor force. So because we're creating the labor force, what does that say for respect for people who are laying the foundation for people who are going to be in the labor force if we don't respect the people who are teaching the laborers?
I would add one thing. And also, just remind them, I invite each and every one of you to come into our programs. Spend some time in there to see our reality. I'm sure your perspective will be totally different when you leave.
I mean, and we knew that how families really appreciated providers during the COVID. We see the pandemic winding down. You still need to appreciate us. And we want to be treated equally as businesses. You know, I remember when Briars talked about moving out of North Philly. The city was giving them tax credits and all of these things. Our center has a budget of $6.5 million. We pay a lot in city wage tax. If I were to thinking about closing, you think anybody? But it's not the 6.5 million. It's the 450 families who send their kids there who work with you and other businesses. So there really is a connection and there is a partnership, and we're really glad that you invited us today. So thank you.
Thank you.
On time. Oh, we have time for question and answers. Okay. Anybody have any questions or answers? I do have questions. Alice was in the public sector. She was working at SEI, and she says she's at Bright Horizons. Tell me, as is somebody in that? No, I mean, I'm saying that because
I know, reversing the queue.
Alice came with a really interesting perspective as a funder, as working in an investment, and I would love to hear that perspective and why.
Why did I make the move? Or yeah, you know what? I hit a point in my life where I loved the work I did. I led 2 global HR functions for 2 very successful financial services firms. And, ultimately, despite what the missions are of the companies, it's just making a lot of rich people richer. And so I always, as you know, I've always been involved ever since we've met 20 some odd years ago. And I just wanted to put my experience and my perspective to help other companies step up. So I did want to make an observation. There's a lot of family childcare homes and childcare centers that have unused capacity because they can't find workers, or they can't afford the workers, or they're having to. It breaks your heart, to see some of these centers at 40% capacity. Even some of Bright Horizons community centers are low capacity. I mean, there's an opportunity right there to work with local businesses to help fund those organizations to fill up that capacity. The building's there, the licensing is there, the quality is there, it's all there, but they just can't get the workers because they don't have enough money, or the tuition goes up so high that no one can afford it. There's you don't have to open your own center. Don't tell anyone at Bright Horizons I said that. But you don't really have to open your own center. That is, for the few very, well-to-do firms, but there are opportunities to sponsor a local center. And that goes just as far from an employment value proposition, from CSR. That's the other thing. A lot of firms are very focused on CSR and ESG, and having that sort of that brand and that value in the community. You know what? Sponsoring childcare centers is there's your CSR. There's your there's your publicity statement out there. I mean, there's a lot of different angles, but sponsoring or helping some of these, standalone community centers fill up what they already have sitting there empty, that'd be awesome.
And no matter what business you're in, I mean, I would love to connect with the building trades. You know how many times childcare centers use plumbers? I should have become a plumber because kids put anything in a toilet and everything. But plumbers are expensive. However, because of a relationship with the building trades, we had the plumbers apprenticeship come in and build a bathroom. From TRF, how much does a bathroom cost? Around $5,000 or more. Painters, electricians. No matter what your business is, partner with childcare centers. Questions? Other questions? All right.
I'm just going to ask us just to take a little pause in our conversation. We're just going to do kind of a soft closeout because there is a lot of good conversations that are happening. I just did want to draw your attention to some of these next steps. I think there's some really key, easy, but also meaningful things that are on the top of people's minds as a result of this meeting. So thank you very much. Sloan did mention that, we will be sending the slides, the presentation out afterwards. Also, if there is somebody like a presenter that you'd like to connect with, please just reach out to Sloan or myself, and we would be glad to make that connection. I am kind of curious, and I just feel like kind of putting, a couple people on the spot here, but I'm just wondering, if you could say, what is your next action step, or what really resonated with you, or what was your primary takeaway? I'm just kind of want to do a little popcorn way of kind of closing us out. And of course, I have the right to pick on my commissioners first. So I'm going to go ahead and pick on Hugh. Hugh, what would you say is kind of your takeaway or aha moment?
Great food at the bank, by the way. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Kaiser. I think that some of this hasn't changed. I've been at this a while with some of you, but number one is got to fix some of the structural problems we have with this, with the macro picture. But also, it was so compelling to hear the providers on the stage or on the panel who are giving this sort of real world, on the ground challenges that they deal with day in and day out, and the commitment they have to this field. Educated people should be educating people. There's a concept. And also just trying to get this thing across the finish line with the multiple challenges they have. And so, I salute them for what they're doing. And so what are we going to do to support them? That's my takeaway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you know what, Hugh, thank you for saying that, because we did mention something briefly when we were talking about our case studies, but I think it bears just kind of reviewing before we adjourn. So we know that wages are a huge issue. Compensation is a long haul. We know that that's really where advocacy comes into play, but also there are things that are happening around the Commonwealth that are helping to kind of remedy a broken system for a period of time. And so in your folder, you will see there is a case study on the York County Childhood Educator Awards. And, I will say, for those of you in the room, there was a program that was operated through the state called the Education and Retention Award dollars, which, was a really important way to help supplement the compensation of childcare providers that were participating in Keystone Stars based on their education, based on the quality of the site that they were on, their longevity. But that was discontinued and kind of in the midst of the pandemic. And the York County Early Learning Investment Commissioners had worked so long in their county to ensure quality slots, and they recognized how important quality childcare is, that they were really scared that they were going to lose, and rightly so, lose quality slots because of people leaving the field, quality educators leaving the field. And so they worked with the county from ARPA dollars. We heard that. They worked with their community foundation. They received private sector donation, and also the Heinz Endowments contributed, and they raised $1.5 million that will allow them to implement a very similar program, but expanded to help keep providers in the field by supplementing their compensation for a period of 3 years, and they hope to do it longer. But there are, and the thing I love about this is they just did it. Like there could have been a million reasons why. Like, well, we're concerned about this issue and what about this? But you know what? They just did it. And so there are definitely some examples, and I'd like to kind of point that out in your folder if you want to get inspired by some replication. I'm going to go ahead. Is there somebody who has a takeaway? This is kind of like my Fed table up here. Okay.
Delaware County's Workforce Development Board.
Yes,
so
hi.
I brought two lenses to this conversation. One is really looking at our employers are so desperate for workers, and they need to have childcare as part of their solution, part of the package so that they're attracting new employers. But then the other side is the way that we help unemployed and underemployed folks get jobs. And I have to say, as a region, the public workforce system, we were not able to work with childcare workers because the wages were so low.
That's right.
So as a region, we collaborated and made a petition so that we could say, this is an exceptional case and why we really do need to be working in the childcare sector. But it feels important that the wages be addressed, right? So if your wages are so low that the public workforce development system, by all kind of regular measures, would not be able to support the sector, feels troublesome. So I hope that we'll be able to grow in the right direction.
I absolutely agree. That is a huge barrier that folks might not be aware of. Like there are state and federal dollars that flow down for high demand careers, which clearly we know that childcare is, but because of the low wages, there are additional dollars and supports that can't be directed to early childhood educators because it's just not high enough. So your petition was?
So we collaborated as a region, the Philadelphia region, and we're able to get childcare put on our high priority occupation list for the next couple of years. But we're really, so we're hoping to make some projects and be able to do some investments as a region and then individual counties. But I think, we were kind of given an okay based on the urgent need, not necessarily that these are high quality positions for workers.
Sarah, case study. That's a great example to lift up. I don't know, Alex, I'm going to ask you, what would you say is kind of your takeaway or, kind of a next step for you?
Well, I guess a couple of thoughts. Clearly, employers and advocacy organizations like the PA Chamber, where I work, can do a better job of providing our business members with the resources to help their people. There is a lot out there. Great to learn about the toolkit, and for employers who, as has been noted a few times, are really desperate for people to add this to their toolkit for recruitment and retention is a real benefit. So if it's a matter of dissemination and awareness, then that's something that should really be a focus. I was also, and to kind of echo the comments from Hugh about the insight from the actual providers and their concerns. Clearly, there's a focus on funding and the financial just realities of being a childcare provider, but there were references to other challenges, other regulations, other just public policy that might make their lives, their operations a little more difficult. And I'm kind of interested to learn more about that. How can this industry be supported from an advocacy standpoint more, holistically? Funding will always be a part of it, but what else can be done to help these partners?
That's such an amazing point, like the multiple layers, right? That's what I'm saying. Like there's like all these pieces of the puzzle. Yeah, systems change is this kind of huge aspirational goal, but there's all these little pieces that can help fit together to get us there sooner. But yeah, thank you very much for that. How about Vivian's table?
follow up on that. Coming from a funder's perspective, I work for a community foundation, and a lot of funders, nonprofit and small business wise, usually don't support operating costs, right? And it's been said here and even in our region of nonprofit support, that's where support is needed, right? So we have been trying to think of a creative way where even our foundation staff doesn't support operating costs, we support programmatic, and we can talk for days on how operational is programmatic. But how can we help that, right? So like when you were talking about a plumber, right? Well, can we make a consortium of services that small businesses, nonprofits need and have it in one place and offer a rate of, let's say, based off your asset size, let's just say it's $1,500 and it gets all these services, and you can now take those line items of operating costs out of your budget and put it back to programmatic costs. It's our kind of innovative way because the restriction is most funders will not fund operations. And even as a funder, when we solicit for regional giving days and all that, a lot of businesses don't want sponsorships to go to operations, right? They want it to go to the programmatic side. And I feel like this would be a better way to service our small businesses and our nonprofits in a way. So
yeah, I think that is a brilliant example of innovation. And Mary, you'll say, like, if your teachers are like not being called in to, like you said, do like bathroom emergencies or staffing, then using those back end supports, it increases quality, right? Absolutely. So is there anybody else who has anything? I don't know if we've heard from table right back there. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm the program manager for the African American Chamber of Commerce of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. I think two of the biggest takeaways for me as I look at this issue is how we define quality early childhood education. I think cultural competency falls into that. Bigger centers don't necessarily provide the best support for children that people who are servicing their communities and neighborhoods know more of just because of their lived experiences. And that perspective was really important as a chamber, we service those small businesses that are minority owned, specifically more so Black owned businesses. But redefining what quality means and looking at the issue as like one solution for early childhood education centers or just education professionals in general can't be blanketed. We have to look at the nuances. And I think that this whole idea of challenging systems will definitely affect the way that we, one, connect with people, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to be able to see who's doing the work and see how we can, leverage that and create partnerships with folks. But overall, just looking at what are the needs? Someone had mentioned earlier, it was nice to see those at-home providers. I didn't know those existed, being new to this. That's why I wanted to be able to come in person and see all that you all had to offer. But, looking at some of the things that we can't see, that's important. And then especially that uplift of the voices of people who are doing this work every day is important. And I think that that's something that needs to be centered in these conversations as much. So definitely thank you for the opportunity to listen to a lot of the expertise and the experience that you all have. And I think, just moving forward for us, it's how do we connect and see who's doing the work and how can we, one, amplify it, but then add our specific perspective to that so we can better address this problem within the region that we serve.
Absolutely. And as you do that and you have, different insights or takeaways, please reach out to us because, like I said, our toolkit does have examples for small businesses, to adopt when things seem like too large or cost intensive or, if for compared to big businesses. But there are strategies, but we would love to know how to better partner with you and, kind of reflect, the needs and the ways that we could really assist the smaller businesses and the families that are employed by them. So thank you very much. All right. Yes, Bob.
First of all, this has been a great conference. Bob Borenstein, Apple Tree Childcare Center, as the business owner of 2 childcare centers here in Philadelphia. It's obvious that we are in an arcane system, especially with subsidy, that COVID has exposed the vulnerabilities of our industry and post-COVID has really continued to expose the sustainability of our industry. My call to action is really to spend more of my time working with local stakeholders, especially people that are in the local community and business owners, and seeing if we can align what our interests are with theirs and find additional sources of revenue, because we know that revenue and cash flow is actually what drives quality.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have a last closing thought? Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I'm Dan O'Brien from Children First. We've heard a lot about Children First today. But the thing that I take away is that it is always critical when the private and public sectors work together on these big issues. And some of the greatest things we've accomplished have been with those partnerships. And I think there's a real opportunity, and you see this in the room and other folks that are outside the room that are already working on these issues, that there's an opportunity for Pennsylvania to lead on this issue. And, we don't always talk about Pennsylvania leading on some of these issues. So it's encouraging to see folks from both sides, from public and private sector in here. And so I think there's a real opportunity to really get something done in the short term, whereas we're usually talking about the long term. This is something that can get done in a couple of years where kids across Pennsylvania are really benefiting from it, which will just, put Pennsylvania at the top of the map in terms of critical education.
Very well said. Yeah, we have a great opportunity. The time is right. So, yes.
So I'm Timothy Thurman, Vice President of Philadelphia YMCA. So I and good to see you, for virtually that. But so I oversee our government work. Most people don't know that the YMCA is the largest healthcare provider in the Commonwealth. And so my role here is going to upgrade and amplify our advocacy. And so look forward to, I thought Sloan great job today, excellent session, but looking forward to kind of working more closely with the folks in the room so that we can do more across the state.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One more, Kate. I just happened to make that eye contact. I was like,
is that on? So I've been a member of the commission for a long time now. And for many years, my call to action when I would leave these was we talked about this all the time, get the information into HR professionals' hands so they can understand and disseminate it to employees. But after today, I think the call to action is follow the money. And we should all ask ourselves why Mary said, and I quote, "Thank God for PNC." Vanguard has a huge stake in this issue, and we're having a meeting at the Federal Reserve Bank, which means the people who control the money think we have a problem. And our business leaders don't understand that. PNC has Pete Danchak at PNC, wonderful human being, but they're bankers. Lloyd Lamb, wonderful human being, but banks in and of themselves don't care about individual people. They care about a crisis. And all of our money institutions are telling us this is a crisis, and we need to get business leaders to understand that.
That can't be any more well said and on the money. So thank you very much, everybody. We just truly appreciate the hospitality of the Fed, the bank, and all of you for your participation today. So thank you very much.